The train comes first, not the whistle, the tremor, a low shiver running through the iron rails, humming beneath the wooden platform as if something alive is approaching through the fog. I'm standing there in the cold, hands tucked beneath my coat, watching the lamps flicker against the steam curling along the tracks. People murmur softly around me, clerks, travelers, night porters, unaware that somewhere on this line, in the shadows between stations, a body was found with its throat opened like a torn seam. Victorian England built its railways on speed, ambition, and progress, but tonight, the iron feels hungry. I breathe in the coal smoke, the oil, the damp wool of the passengers pressing close. It feels wrong, the kind of wrong you only notice when the world quiets down. If you're here with me, listening in the half-light, docked, stay close. These stories settle differently in the dark. And before we descend deeper into the tunnels of what happened, gently tap like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. I read every place, every time zone, like lights along a distant track, because once the train lurches forward, there's no turning back. This is where fear traveled by timetable, where murder hid behind velvet curtains, and where the promise of modernity collided with the oldest terror of all, being trapped with a killer and no way to run. Tonight, we open the case of the gruesome railway murders, and the night the rails carried more than passengers. Subscribe and stay with me. The rails ahead are long, the stations are dim, and the night trains carry secrets no timetable ever recorded. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? The past is never as distant as it seems. The tremor comes before the sound. You feel it under your boots first, a faint shiver running through the old timber planks, quivering like a breath drawn in the dark. At this hour, the station is barely awake. Gas lamps burn low along the platform, their yellow halos trembling in the damp air. You pull your coat tighter as the fog curls around your ankles, soft as wool, heavy as breath from something unseen. London is distant here, its roar softened to a low, uneasy hum, and for a moment, you could almost believe the city itself is holding still, listening. But the rails never sleep. They vibrate beneath you, a subtle, rhythmic pulse, not fast enough to be a train approaching, not slow enough to be the night settling. It feels wrong, somehow deliberate. You shift your weight, leaning slightly over the edge to peer down the line. Nothing, only darkness stretching into darkness, a corridor cut through fog thick enough to swallow whole carriages. The station porter is sweeping somewhere behind you, bristles whispering over stone, but even he hasn't noticed the strange heartbeat beneath the boards. The tremor grows, just enough to stir the fine soot along the rails, making it dance like black snow in the lantern glow. You hear a faint creak in the distance, metal bowing, wood tightening as if the line itself is stretching awake. A few early travelers stand scattered along the platform, collars turned up, faces half hidden behind scarves and exhaustion. They don't feel it, or maybe they do, and have learned the Victorian habit of pretending not to. It is easier to dismiss unsettling things when the world insists on progress, timetables, and punctuality. You glance at the station clock. Too early for anything scheduled, too late for any freight. The night trains have already passed, leaving only the long, sighing quiet of an empty line. The tremor persists, steady as a pulse beneath a coat sleeve. A drop of condensation falls from the iron canopy overhead and splashes on your glove. Cold, quicker. Now, your fingertips brush the edge of the wooden platform again, and this time the vibration hums up your arm like a warning. You straighten, eyes fixed on the fog, and then you hear it. Not a whistle, not a rumble, but a faint scrape, like metal dragging against stone far below the surface. You step back without thinking. Something in your chest tightens, not with fear, but with recognition. The sound is too soft to be a train, too slow to be machinery. It is a sound made by something moving blind through the darkness, following rails it does not belong on. Behind you, the porter stops sweeping. You hear his broom still in the air. Silence thickens. The tremor vanishes. The scrape does not. It grows clearer, closer, almost purposeful. A few passengers lift their heads, sensing the break in ordinary routine. The fog parts slightly, revealing the gleam of the rails stretching out like two silver blades pointing into the unknown. You step forward again, peering into the dark. For a breathless moment, one that tightens your throat and freezes the air in your lungs, you swear you see light flicker along the line. A dull, amber glow, low to the ground, moving far too slowly for a locomotive and far too smoothly for a lantern carried by human hands. Then, as quickly as it came, the glow fades. The scrape stops. The fog closes. The station exhales, timbers settling, lamps swaying gently. But the rails, remember. You can feel it in the quiet that follows, heavier than it should be, lingering like breath on cold glass. Something passed through the station before dawn, and it wasn't scheduled to arrive at all. The station before sunrise feels like a place the world forgot. You enter it as the lamps burn their last hours, their glow thinning like tired breath along brick walls stained by a century of coal smoke. The fog presses close to the glass panes of the waiting room, tapping gently, as if trying to slip inside. Even the pigeons roosting in the rafters sleep with their feathers puffed and uneasy, shifting now and then, as though the air itself whispers secrets they cannot bear to hear. Your footsteps echo too loudly. They always do at this hour. The sound travels beneath benches, between pillars, and out toward the open platforms, where the rails lie cold and silver. You pause in that long corridor that connects the entrance to the main hall, listening. Somewhere, a newspaper sheet drifts across the stone floor like a pale ghost, propelled by a draft you cannot feel. There is no wind. The gas lamps flicker with a weary pulse. Once, stations were meant to inspire confidence, order, progress, the promise of a nation linked by steel. But here in the early hours, before the crowds arrive to fill the emptiness with purpose, the station feels like a cathedral of shadows. The architecture arches high overhead, a ribcage of iron supporting the night's last breath. You move slowly, not from fear, but because the silence draws you into its rhythm. A quiet station has its own heartbeat. Today, though, it skips, stutters, shifts irregular in a way you can't quite name. A lone woman sits on a bench, her gloved hands folded neatly over a travel bag. She watches the fog beyond the platform doors, with the solemnity of a widow waiting for a signal that might never come. Her gaze flicks to you briefly, then she looks away, as if afraid of being asked why she arrived so early, or why she won't board any train until the sun is fully risen. You approach the ticket window, closed, the shutters pulled down, the edges lined with dust. A faint smudge of something darker clings near the latch. Soot, you tell yourself. Just soot. But your breath grows shallow anyway. You've seen enough Victorian stations to know the difference between industrial smudge and something that stains from within, something that lingers. From the far platform, a metallic clang rings out, sharp, distant, and out of place. You turn, but the sound has already dissolved into silence. Nothing moves. The clock continues its steady turn, each second dropping like cold water onto your spine. You walk toward the platforms, boots thudding softly on the wooden boards. The fog greets you with open arms, unfurling in long ribbons that wrap around the pillars, slithering along the rails. The lamps here burn dimmer, struggling against the pale breath of the morning. Your eyes follow the tracks, stretching into the dark like a pair of narrow, ominous corridors. There is a man further down the porter from yesterday, the same one who stopped sweeping at the whisper of that impossible tremor. He stands very still now, staring into the mist with his broom suspended in mid-air, not sweeping, not moving, just listening. You hesitate to call out to him. The stillness feels too fragile to break. Then you hear it again, not a tremor this time, but a soft, rhythmic tapping beneath the fog, light, precise, like footsteps walking along metal, not on the platform, on the rails themselves. The porter finally lowers his broom, but he doesn't turn toward you. He whispers instead a single brittle sentence carried by the damp air. It happened again. Your breath cools in your lungs. What did? You ask, though you already know the answer. He nods toward the tracks, his voice barely more than a shiver. Someone walked the line before dawn, but no train passed, and no man returned. The fog thickens, swallowing his words, and the station silent, breathless waits for you to follow the rails into the dawn. You find the night guard in the farthest corner of the station, the part the public rarely sees, where the walls sweat cold and the lamps burn dimmer, as if reluctant to illuminate whatever lingers there. His small office sits beside the signal room, a cramped wooden box with a warped door and a flickering lamp that casts more shadow than light. He looks older than yesterday, not in years, but in something deeper, a kind of hollowing behind the eyes that only comes from hearing a sound you were never meant to hear. He doesn't notice you at first. He's hunched over his desk, fingers trembling slightly as they trace a line on the railway map spread beneath the lamplight. The map is stained at the edges, dotted with small ink marks, stations, sidings, tunnels, and all the places where steel meets stone. But one mark stands out. A single red circle drawn around a lonely stretch of track between two stations. No platforms, no houses, only rails, and the heavy, dark. You clear your throat softly. He flinches before lifting his gaze. "You shouldn't be here this early," he murmurs. His voice carries the tremor you felt beneath the platform. "Not after what happened last night." You sit across from him, the chair creaking in the cold. "Tell me." His eyes drift toward the window, where fog presses against the glass like a sleeping animal. For a long moment, he says nothing. Then, "It wasn't a train," he whispers, but it sounded like one trying to breathe. You wait. He folds his hands, but they don't stop shaking. "Just after 3 in the morning, I heard something in the tunnel east of the station, the long one, the one they carved through clay and old riverbed. I thought it was an early freight. Nothing unusual. But the sound, it didn't move right." He lifts a trembling finger and draws it slowly across the map, tracing the marked stretch of track. It stayed in one place. Engines don't do that. You feel the cold rise from the floorboards. "At first it was faint," he continues, "metal shifting, rails creaking. Then I heard footsteps, heavy ones, too heavy for a man. But they were walking, pacing back and forth inside the tunnel, as if someone was waiting. Waiting for what, you ask? He swallows, hard. His Adam's apple jerks like something caught in his throat. "Waiting for the train to stop," he says. Only there was no train. A single drop of condensation runs down the inside of the window. You don't look away from him. "And then?" you ask. He grips the edge of the desk until his knuckles whiten. "Then it knocked." Your breath catches. "Knocked?" you repeat. "On what?" He hesitates, then leans forward, lowering his voice as though the station itself might be listening. "On the rails." You picture it, something in the tunnel, tapping the cold steel with deliberate rhythm. Not a worker, not a passenger, something else. Something patient. "I went to look," he continues, voice cracking. "I thought maybe someone had fallen, maybe a vagrant, maybe a drunk, but when I reached the tunnel mouth," he wipes a trembling hand across his face. "The fog was thick. I could barely see a yard in front of me. And then, a deep clang shakes the office. Not a loud one, just enough to make the glass rattle. The guard's breath stops in his chest. Your heart stalls. The sound echoes through the station, rolling through the walls like a distant tolling bell metal hitting metal, as if something beneath the ground is knocking again. The guard closes his eyes, whispering the last words like a confession. It wants the trains. It wants the people on them. And it's getting closer. The lamp flickers, and the station holds its breath. You are the one who finds the unclaimed ticket. It lies on the counter of the booking office like a forgotten pulse, a small rectangle of stiff paper, edges curling from the damp. The ink is still sharp, the date freshly printed, the destination clear in its tidy Victorian script. But the name written in delicate handwriting along the bottom edge feels wrong somehow. Too hurried, too uneven, as though the hand that wrote it shook with something more than cold. The clerk hasn't returned yet. His coat still hangs neatly on its hook, sleeves empty, one cuff brushing softly against the wall each time a draft sneaks through the doorway. He was meant to open the shutters before sunrise. He was meant to take this ticket, stamp it, tear it cleanly, and hand it back with the polite nod that railway clerks practice like breathing. Instead, the shutters stay down, the lamp burns low, and the ticket waits. You pick it up. It's warm. The realization makes your chest tight. Warmth means recent touch, recent presence, a hand holding it moments before. But the station is empty, except for you and the distant guard still trembling in his office, whispering about footsteps and metal breathing in the dark. You examine the handwritten name, Jonathan P. Lyle, a respectable name, a name that belongs to a man with a steady job, a polished watch chain, and a habit of arriving exactly on time, someone who would never abandon his ticket on a counter like misplaced change. You step back, glancing around as if expecting him to appear from the fog, a tall gentleman with a tired smile and an apology for the mix-up. But there is only silence, thick and unmoving, pooling along the floorboards like cooled wax. You turn the ticket over. On the back, pressed faintly into the paper, are small indentations, scratches, like the tip of a pen dragging across the surface without ink. They aren't words, they aren't numbers, they look like tally marks. You run your thumb across them. They're shallow but intentional. Someone carved these lines with the pressure of a man writing in desperation. 5 marks, then 4, then 5 again. A broken rhythm, a message in a language that has no translation. Your breath fogs the air as you look up at the still closed booking window. The clerk's chair is pushed back slightly. One leg sits at an angle, as if someone stood so abruptly that it twisted beneath them. A single glove lies on the counter beside the ledger. You reach out and touch it. It's wet, not from rain, not from melted frost. Something darker, thinner, almost metallic. You wipe your hand on your coat without thinking. Behind you, the station clock ticks louder, each second falling like a hammer. You step into the main hall again, the unclaimed ticket still in your hand. The lamps cast long shadows across the floor, stretching toward the platforms like fingers reaching for escape. The fog thickens at the doorway, swirling with unusual purpose. Shapes, form, and dissolve. You stand perfectly still as the boards beneath your boots tremble, faint, hesitant, a ghost of the earlier tremor. Then you hear it, a soft exhale, human, but strained, close. You turn sharply. No one stands behind you. No one breathes nearby. And yet the air still quivers with the echo of someone who was there a heartbeat before you turned. Someone who held that ticket. Someone who never arrived at his destination. Someone who may never have left the station at all. You stare down at the paper in your hand. The warmth has vanished. Only the tally marks remain. The carriage sits alone in the siding, sealed tight as a confession box. You notice it the moment you step onto the far platform, not because it stands out, but because it tries so hard not to. Victorian engineers designed these compartments to feel private, polished, respectable, but this one seems to be shrinking into itself, as though the very wood remembers something it cannot bear to show. A lock glints on the door, not the ordinary brass latch used for passengers, a station-issued iron lock, heavy, bolted, freshly applied. You approach slowly. The fog clings to the windows of the compartment, making the glass opaque and pale like blind eyes. You wipe a patch clear with your sleeve, expecting only darkness inside an empty seat, perhaps a forgotten newspaper. But the smear you leave behind streaks something onto the glass, something red, thin, almost dried. Your fingers stiffen. You rub them together. The residue flakes into dust. Behind you, the rails groan a long, low sigh that vibrates through the boards. The station porter, still pale from the morning's tremors, stands several yards away, arms folded, shoulders tight. "Don't open it," he calls softly. You don't answer. Something pulls you closer to the locked compartment. Curiosity or dread, or both, stitched together like bad thread. You rest your hand against the door. The wood is warm beneath your palm, warmer than the morning air should allow, as though something inside is still holding on to its last breath. "What happened here?" you ask. The porter hesitates. His silence feels heavier than any explanation. So you examine the exterior instead. The brass handle is smudged, not with fingerprints but with long streaks drawn downward, as though a hand slid slowly off it. The frame of the window bears 3 deep scratches, parallel lines gouged into the varnish, not made by a blade, too uneven, too desperate. You crouch, peering at the narrow gap beneath the door. Darkness pools beneath the compartment like ink, but something else catches your eye. A sliver of fabric, a scrap of wool, torn, pressed into the crack, the thread stretched as if pulled by frantic fingers. You reach for it carefully, but it disintegrates the moment you touch it, dissolving into a fine, soot-black powder. You stand again, heart tightening in your chest. Who locked it? You ask the porter. His gaze drops to the boards. The guards did, after they found what was inside. What did they find? He doesn't speak. Instead, he gestures toward the other end of the siding, where 2 constables stood earlier. Only their boot prints remain, now heavy indentations, circling the door, pausing, turning. You imagine their faces in the lantern light, pale as bone as they backed away. You place your ear to the wood. At first, there is nothing. Then, a faint rustle, like fabric shifting, or something settling in a seat, but no breeze blows through the sealed compartment. Your throat tightens. You step back, breath fogging the air. The porter finally speaks. The man who boarded that compartment never stepped out. They searched the entire train, every carriage, every walkway. But his luggage sat untouched, his coat hung on the hook, and his seat was still warm. You feel the tremor again, not under your boots this time, but inside your ribs. What about his body? You whisper. The porter looks at the sealed door. They never found it. A long silence settles, thick as steam from a dying locomotive. And the worst part, he adds quietly, is that the door was locked from the inside. You stare at the compartment, the scratches, the torn wool, the warmth, locked from within, but empty. The boards beneath you vibrate once more, a soft, steady tremor, rising like a heartbeat through the rails. Something moved in that compartment last night, and you are beginning to realize it might still be there. You are the one they summon when the whispers grow too loud. A messenger boy finds you near the station's outer gate, breathless and pale, his cap clutched to his chest. He doesn't speak at first, only points toward the eastern stretch of track, where the fog hangs lower, thicker, as if shielding something the morning isn't ready to reveal. His trembling tells you enough. Something lies out there, something no one wants to see alone. You walk with him in silence, boots sinking softly into damp earth as you leave the platform behind. The rails diverge ahead, slipping into open ground. The lantern in your hand sways gently, its glow barely cutting through the milky haze. The fog swallows sound, smell, warmth, everything except the faint metallic tang that grows sharper with each step. A constable waits by the embankment. His hat is askew, his face the color of ash. He nods to you but doesn't meet your eyes. "Down there," he mutters, voice cracked around the edges. You descend the slope slowly. The grass is wet with dew, but the dew near the rails is darker, denser, pooling in thick indentations, where someone fell. The fog parts reluctantly as you approach, thinning just enough for shapes to emerge. A figure lies on its back between the sleepers. At first glance, it seems almost peaceful. Arms splayed loosely to the sides, coat unbuttoned as if preparing for sleep. But the stillness is wrong, too absolute, too final. The closer you draw, the more the details sharpen into something cold and merciless. The throat is not simply cut, it is opened, a wide, ragged wound carved with a violence that speaks more of frenzy than tools. You kneel beside the body. The lantern's glow brushes the skin pale, waxen, already stiffening in the early chill. You see flecks of soot embedded in his coat, a hint of something smeared along his sleeve, the kind of residue left behind by an engine rushing past at close distance. But no trains passed this way last night. You run a gloved finger along the torn fabric. The edges are uneven, torn from the inside out, not sliced cleanly from above. Your stomach tightens. The constable clears his throat. We thought, maybe he stumbled, fell onto the rails, but he gestures weakly toward the wound, unable to finish. You lift the lantern higher, letting its circle expand. Footprints appear, some shallow, some deep, trailing erratically along the line. A struggle, a desperate one. You follow the prints until they vanish abruptly, as though lifted into the fog. What time was he found, you ask? The constable glances at his notebook. Just after 4. Trackman spotted him while checking the line. Anything else? His eyes flick toward the rails. There were marks. Marks? Scratches, he whispers. On the steel. Fresh ones. You crouch again, angling the lantern's light along the shining edge of the rail. There, running parallel to the sleeper, are 3 deep gouges, grooves dragged with enough force to bite metal. Something grabbed the rail, something strong. Your breath condenses in a thin cloud. You steady your voice. Was he carrying anything? A ticket, the constable says. To the next station down the line. Your heart stirs uneasily. Do you have it? He shakes his head. It's gone. You stare at the body again, the hollow throat, the stiff hands curled into fists, the faint trail of soot leading toward the tunnel mouth in the distance. A breeze stirs, carrying the faintest metallic scent, warm, hauntingly familiar. Behind you, the messenger boy whispers a single sentence that chills the back of your neck. He wasn't alone, sir. You look up sharply. What do you mean? The boy points at the rails, eyes wide, voice cracking. There were 2 sets of footprints before the fog took them. The lantern flickers, the fog closes, and the line silent, cold, endless waits for the next body. You reach Shoreditch just as the city begins to stir, not with the normal bustle of carts and factory whistles, but with a tight, anxious hum that clings to the fog-choked streets like soot. People stand in small clusters along the pavement, voices lowered, eyes darting toward the railway arches that loom over the neighborhood like ribs of a giant creature. The station itself feels different today. You sense it even before stepping inside, a heaviness in the air, as though the walls have absorbed too much noise in too little time. The ticket hall, usually dim and sleepy at this hour, is teeming with restless figures. Women clutch gloved hands to their mouths. Men whisper in strained tones, their faces pale beneath the gas lamp's thin glow. A constable sees you and waves you forward with urgency. "Thank God you're here," he mutters, sweat beading at his temple. "It's a mess, a real mess." "What happened?" you ask, though you already feel the answer moving, beneath your ribs like a slow, coiling dread. He leads you through the murmuring crowd and down the corridor toward the platforms. Each step echoes sharply, too sharply, and you wish even the sound of your boots would hush itself. Panic thrives on noise, and Shoreditch is trembling with it. As the corridor widens, you begin to understand why. The platform is flooded not with water, but with people. Dozens of passengers cluster near the rails, some demanding answers, others too stunned to speak. Station workers pace helplessly, pointing at the line as though expecting it to explain itself. And there, lying just beyond the edge of the platform, is the reason for the uproar. A jacket, a neat, brown Victorian coat, folded strangely, as if its owner had stepped out of it mid-stride and vanished into the morning fog. A woman near you lets out a stifled cry. Her voice wavers as she speaks to no one in particular. "I saw him. I swear, I saw him. He stepped off the train and dode, then." She gestures helplessly toward the empty jacket. He wasn't there anymore. You crouch near the coat. The fabric is still warm. Passengers lean in, whispering sharply. "He was right beside me." I blinked, and he was gone. No one could have run that fast. There's nowhere to go. It's the same as the stories from yesterday about the others. Their voices dissolve into frantic murmurs. The constable kneels down beside you. "There's more," he says quietly. "Look." He points beneath the platform lip. Something glints there. You lie flat and angle your lantern downward. The light spills over the ballast, illuminating the underside of the station's structure beams. Bolts, grime, the usual clutter of a Victorian railway. But among the stone and metal lies something out of place. Scratches, fresh ones, 3 deep, parallel gouges carved into the iron beam, the same marks you saw near the first body. They run downward in jagged lines, as though something dragged its weight beneath the platform, scraping metal like a creature clawing its way through the dark. You inhale slowly through your teeth. "What are we dealing with?" the constable whispers. You don't answer. You rise, scanning the faces around you, the wide eyes, the trembling hands. The terror in Shoreditch is not the usual fear of crime. It's older, instinctive, the kind that settles into the bones. Voices swell again as a station worker pushes through the crowd. "Trackman says the rails were vibrating," he announces. Before the train even stopped, the murmurs sharpen into gasps. Vibrating. Before the train stopped. Before anything arrived. You look down at the jacket again, the warm fabric, the strange fold, the marks beneath the platform. Someone disappeared here. Not run, not jumped, not taken by another passenger. Taken by the line itself. The fog curls around your boots as you straighten, and from, somewhere deep in the tunnels, too distant for the others to hear, you catch the faintest echo, a scrape, soft, steady, getting closer. Shoreditch is right to panic. Whatever stalks the rails is not finished. You find the journal by accident. It lies on a wooden bench at the far end of the platform, the part where the lamps sputter more often, where passengers rarely sit, unless the trains are delayed and the night grows too heavy. At first you think it's just another forgotten item, the sort of thing travelers leave behind in the rush of their morning routines. But as you approach, the fog seems to part around it, almost deliberately, revealing the curled leather cover like a secret waiting to be uncovered. A thin layer of soot dusts the spine. You brush it away. Your fingertips come back red, not bright red, darker, thicker, something that clings. You wipe your hand on your coat and hesitate, listening. The platform is empty now. The crowds of Shoreditch dispersed, some pushed out by fear, others lingering in taverns or stairwells to whisper tales they're too terrified to say aloud in daylight. Only the hum of the gas lamps and the faint rustle of fog remain. You open the Carfate journal. The first few pages are crisp, filled with neat handwriting, a gentleman's notes perhaps, documenting meetings, addresses, appointments, all ordinary, but when you turn further in, the handwriting changes. Slanted, rushed, tremoring across the page as though the author wrote in motion or in fear. You read the first line of the section written in the frantic hand. "I hear it under me again." Your breath tightens. The next line, "The rails are breathing." You glance instinctively at the tracks. Silent, still, stretching into the fog like veins through a sleeping body. You continue reading. No one else hears it. Not the guards, not the man beside me. It begins when the train slows, always then. A pulse in the floorboards, like something beneath us is waking. The ink smears midway down the sentence. You turn the page. "This morning, I saw something in the window reflection. Not outside, behind me. A shape, tall, grey, without a face watching as I tried not to move. Your skin prickles. Your breath fogs the cold air. Another entry follows. It boarded at the last station. I swear it did. Car 3, compartment 4. But no one else saw it. No one else reacted, as though it wasn't meant for them." The slanted handwriting grows increasingly chaotic. It touched the glass. The whole compartment shook. The next line is nearly illegible, scratched in jagged strokes. It wants someone who rides alone. Then, beneath that, it is following me. A blot of ink obscures part of the page, but you can make out the next line clearly. "If I leave the train, will it follow onto the platform? God forgive me if so." The final entry is the shortest, only 4 words, cramped into the bottom corner as though written seconds before something happened. "It stepped inside with me." The page ends with a smear, not of ink, but something thicker, a dark streak dragged across the corner. You close the journal carefully, your hands colder than the morning air. Behind you, a sudden clang echoes along the rails, sharp, metallic, Too close. You turn. The platform is empty. The station's lamps flicker. But there, on the wooden boards near your boots, lies a small, fresh fleck of soot falling from nowhere, settling like a breath from something standing just out of sight. You pick up the journal again. The leather is still warm, and the rails, for the first time since Shoreditch, begin to tremble. You meet him in the old signal room, where dust gathers in corners like sleeping spirits, and the telegraph wires hum faintly, as though carrying secrets instead of messages. The inspector sits at a narrow wooden desk, the lamplight carving long shadows across the deep lines of his face. He doesn't stand when you enter. He only lifts his eyes dark, tired, sharp enough to cut through fog. He looks like a man who has seen too much, and expects to see more. "You've read the journal," he says quietly. "It isn't a question." You nod. The leather-bound volume lies in your coat, its weight heavier than its size. He gestures for you to sit. The chair creaks beneath your weight, the sound too loud in a room meant for murmurs and coded taps. The inspector folds his hands atop the desk. His knuckles are nicked and stained, as if he has been scraping at metal recently, or at something clinging to it. 3 disappearances in 2 days, he begins. 4. You correct, because you cannot shake the warmth of the unclaimed ticket, the jacket at Shoreditch, the body on the line. At least, he nods, slowly, and they all share the same pattern. The tremors, the fog, the scratches on the rails. He leans back, exhaling through his nose. This isn't the work of a man. You swallow, your throat suddenly dry. Then what is it? He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he reaches beneath the desk and sets something before you, a heavy iron object, long, narrow, sharply pointed at one end, a railway spike, bent, twisted, as though something crushed it in a fist. You run your fingers along the warped metal. This would take incredible strength, and it was found, the inspector says, inside a sealed compartment. Your breath catches. The same one? The very same. His voice darkens. The guards, who opened that door, 2 of them won't speak. One left his post entirely, said the compartment smelled like hot metal and breath. You don't ask what breath means in this context. You picture the journal again. The rails are breathing, and your skin crawls. The inspector reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a small scrap of fabric sealed in a paper envelope. He slides it across the desk. You open it carefully. The fabric is wool, deep grey, finely woven but stiff as though something burned it without heat. One edge is frayed, the threads stretched and twisted. This was found caught in a rail joint, the inspector says, 1/2 mile from where the body was discovered. You look up. Human clothing? That's the trouble. His eyes narrow. It's not wool. At least, not any kind used here. Not any I've seen at all. The telegraph clicks suddenly behind you, a single sharp tap that startles both of you. You turn toward the machine. No operator sits at the key. No message is being sent. Yet the needle pulses again and again. A slow, deliberate rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. The inspector stiffens. That's not code. He rises from his chair, stepping toward the telegraph as though approaching a sleeping animal that might wake with teeth. You stand too, instinct pulling you near the door. The machine clicks once more, then stops. A silence follows, heavy, suffocating, before the inspector speaks in a voice just above a whisper. It's mimicking. You feel the cold gather at the base of your spine. Mimicking what? His eyes cut to you, dark and certain. The sound under the platform. Another tremor ripples through the floorboards, faint but unmistakable. You grip the journal in your coat. Whatever stalks the lines is no longer content with the rails. It has begun learning the sounds of men. You hear the whistle long before you see the train. It cuts through the fog like a blade, thin, strained, too sharp around the edges. Not the confident cry of a locomotive announcing its arrival, but the desperate pitch of something being forced forward against its will. The inspector stiffens beside you on the platform, his hand darting to the rail, fingers splayed, feeling for the vibration that always seems to come first. It doesn't. There is no tremor, no warning thrum, only the whistle. and the sound of something heavy tearing through the air. Passengers scatter as the fog bulges outward, lifting like a curtain pulled by invisible hands. Through the shifting grey, the shape of a train emerges, but it's wrong from the moment you glimpse it. The engine lurches sideways, as if the rails struggle to contain its weight. The lamps flicker unevenly, casting wild shadows that dance along the platform walls. You step back immediately. The inspector grabs your shoulder. Stay, behind the line. His voice is too calm, the kind men use when they're masking fear. The engine roars past, shrieking as metal grinds against metal. Sparks erupt beneath the wheels. The platform shudders under the force of it. You cover your ears, but the sound isn't just noise, it feels like it burrows into your chest, rattling bone and breath alike. Then you notice something horrifying. The driver's cab is empty. The train barrels forward without anyone at the controls, without any human form leaning out the window, without even the faint outline of a silhouette behind the glass. You shout over the thunder, "Where's the driver?" The inspector doesn't answer. His eyes are fixed on the wheels, or rather, what drags beneath them. A dark shape clings to the underside of the engine, long, lithe, twisted in a way no living thing should be. It moves with the train, gripping the beams with elongated limbs that bend at impossible angles. When the lantern light hits, you see something glint, not metal, not flesh. Something in between. You choke on the fog. The train hurtles past the edge of the platform, but it doesn't slow, not even slightly. It barrels straight toward the end of the line, toward the barrier meant to stop runaway carriages. You feel every second stretch thin as wire. The inspector shouts, "Brace!" The impact comes like thunder cracking open the world. Wood splinters, metal screams. The first two carriages, jackknife, derailing in a shower of sparks. The fog explodes outward, thick with dust and steam. And then silence, the kind that drops over everything like a shroud. You and the inspector push forward through the debris, hearts pounding, breath ragged. Lamps flicker, casting trembling light over twisted steel and shattered planks. Steam hisses from ruptured pipes, filling the air with the smell of scorched metal. You reach the crushed engine first. Its wheels still spin in the air, turning slowly, as though resisting the idea of stopping. The inspector climbs onto the wreckage, peering into the cab. "Empty," he mutters. "Completely empty. But you already know that." Your gaze drifts to the underside of the engine. Nothing clings there now. Only deep, parallel gouges scraped into the beams, the same marks found on the rails, on the platform, on the edges of sealed compartments. Your breath fogs the air. "It rode the train," you whisper. "But it didn't stay." The inspector turns, his face pale under the shifting lamplight. "It jumped," he says softly. "Before the crash." You stare into the fog-filled night, the rails still humming faintly underfoot. Whatever stalks the railway lines is no longer bound to the trains. It moves between them now, freely, deliberately, and somewhere out in the dark, it waits for the next one. The wreckage from the runaway train is still cooling when you reach the siding where the surviving carriages have been dragged. The night fog hasn't lifted, it clings to everything, ribboning through broken windows, settling into torn upholstery, curling around the wheels like smoke from a quiet fire. Workers move through the scene with lanterns raised, their silhouettes long and distorted, as though the fog reshapes their bodies before returning them to human form. You stop at the fourth carriage. This one is intact. Too intact. No broken beams, no shattered windows, no splintered doors, only stillness unnatural, complete. A station hand sees you approach and backs away from the compartment door without being asked. He wipes his palms on his vest, avoiding your eyes. "No one will go inside," he mutters. "Not after the noise." You rest your hand on the brass handle, cold, lifeless, but the wood beneath it feels warm, just like the sealed compartment days earlier. You pull the door open slowly. The lantern light from the platform barely touches the interior. Darkness settles in the corners like something waiting. You step inside. Immediately, the air changes. It presses against your skin, thick, humid, as though someone had been breathing heavily here moments before. You lift your lantern higher. Its glow glances off velvet seats, polished brass fittings, and patterns in the carpet dulled by soot. At first, nothing seems out of place. Then the sound begins. A faint tap, soft, sharp, coming from behind the far wall of the compartment. You freeze. The inspector, arriving behind you, whispers, "Again?" The tapping repeats, louder this time. You set your lantern on the seat and move toward the back panel. Victorian railway compartments often hide structural beams behind wooden walls, beams that echo when something touches them or scratches at them. You press your ear to the panel. A long silence. Then scrape. Your skin tightens. The faintest vibration travels through the wood, brushing your cheek like a cold fingertip. You feel the inspector's breath catch behind you. "Something's in the wall," you whisper. "Or between the carriages," he murmurs. You take a step back, and the lantern light shifts, illuminating something you didn't see before: a mark on the velvet seat opposite you. A dark stain spread like a shadow that refuses to dissipate. You touch it gently. The fabric is damp. The inspector kneels to inspect a corner of the carpet. "Look at this." He pulls back a section of the rug, revealing deep indentations in the wooden floor beneath, not footprints, not handprints, kneeling marks, as if someone crouched there for a long time, pressed into the floor by weight and will. You swallow, but the compartment was empty. Empty when the workers opened it. He corrects softly. You both look toward the door. The lantern flickers again. That's when you notice the windows. Condensation has formed on the inside of the glass, thick trails running downward, as if someone's breath fogged them moments ago. You approach one pane, raising the lantern, and then you see it. A print, a handprint, spread wide across the fogged glass. Not small like a child's, not normal like a man's. Long fingers, too long, tapering into points that leave streaks down the glass as though dragging. You feel the inspector step back behind you. "Did the workers see this?" you ask. "No," he whispers. "They said the windows were clean when they opened the carriage," meaning the print appeared after, within minutes, while the carriage stood empty, or while something hid inside, waiting for darkness. You turn toward the door. The tapping begins again. Only this time, it's not behind the wall. It's under the floorboards, directly beneath your feet. Slow at first, then faster, then frantic. The inspector grabs your arm. "Out! Now!" You both stumble from the compartment as the tapping crescendos into a violent rattle, shaking the wooden boards, the seats, the very frame of the carriage. Workers flee down the platform. Lanterns swing wildly. Steam hisses. You watch from the doorway as the compartment seems to come alive, the windows fogging over completely, the walls trembling, the handprint smearing as though gliding across the glass on its own. Then, just as suddenly as it began, silence. Total and absolute. The inspector exhales. "It's moving," he says. "Not just between stations." He looks at the trembling rails beneath your boots. "It's moving with the carriages now." And somewhere inside the fog, something unseen exhales a long, slow breath that travels along the metal like a living thing. You reach milepost 7 just after dusk, when the last smear of daylight slips behind the gaslit rooftops and the fog begins to gather like a second skin along the rails. The inspector said the sighting happened here halfway between stations, too far from houses, too close to the river where mist rises in coils. It's the kind of place railway workers avoid after dark, not because of superstition, but because the silence feels a little too alive. The path narrows as you walk, gravel crunching softly beneath your boots. Thick weeds brush your coat. The post rises ahead of you, a tall, weathered beam marked with a fading black number 7, leaning slightly as if tired from holding its place for decades. A telegraph wire hums overhead, vibrating gently in the evening wind. You stop at the edge of the embankment. The rails stretch forward into a darkness so dense it feels more like a wall than an absence of light. You hold your lantern higher, watching its weak glow tremble. The air feels different here, colder, yet heavier, like breath pressed against your neck. You pull out your notebook. A woman seen walking along the track, the report said, just before dawn, barefoot, moving slowly, as though counting each sleeper beneath her feet. She never looked up, the witness wrote, never seemed to hear the approaching train. The brakeman pulled the lever, sparks flew, the wheels screamed, and when he leapt down expecting to find shattered bone and cloth, there was nothing. No woman, no blood, only a trail of long, dark marks running along the rail, as if something had been dragged. You stand now where the trail was found. Your lantern sways as a gust of cold air threads through the grass. You kneel, brushing aside the weeds, their faint grooves etched into the metal, almost polished from weather, but still visible, deep, parallel, the same marks, always the same marks. A crack of twigs snaps behind you. You turn sharply, lantern raised. Fog pools across the embankment, parting around a dim figure standing just beyond the rails. A woman. She stands with her back to you, rigid, motionless. Her dress hangs in tatters, fabric stirring slightly as though brushed by unseen hands. Her hair falls in dark strands down her back. Bare feet, pale against the gravel. You take one step forward. The lantern flickers. "Ma'am?" Your voice sounds strange in the thick air. "Are you hurt?" She doesn't move. Another step, another breath. The air tightens around you. You reach out a trembling hand. The inspector's warning rings in your memory. Never trust what you see near the line. Your fingers hover just inches from her shoulder when you finally hear it. The faintest tremor beneath your boots. Too faint to shake the ground. Too subtle for anything with weight, but enough for you to recognize it. The same pulse that came before the runaway train. The same pulse beneath the sealed compartments. The same pulse near every disappearance. You yank your hand back. The woman turns her head. Not fully, just enough. Her face remains in shadow, too dark to see, too still to read. But her mouth curves slightly, too slightly, into something that is not quite a smile. You stumble back, and she fades, not vanishes, not runs. Fades as though the fog draws her inward, unraveling her shape thread by thread until only darkness remains. The tremor stops. You stand alone by the rails, your breath shaking in small clouds. The lantern sputters once, twice. Then, from far down the line, through the heavy night air, you hear it. A single, distant scrape, metal on metal, alive, listening, waiting, and you realize, with a cold certainty settling beneath your ribs, whatever you just saw was not a woman. It was the line borrowing a shape you would follow, a lure, a mimic, and it almost worked. You return to the station long after the lamps have been lit, long after the workers have gone quiet and begun speaking in half-whispers that dissolve into the fog. The inspector meets you at the entrance, his jaw tight, his coat creased from hours of restless movement. He holds something wrapped in cloth, something he doesn't uncover until you've stepped into the abandoned luggage office, where shadows pool in corners like unclaimed parcels. He unfolds the cloth. A map, hand-drawn, detailed to the point of obsession. You kneel beside him as he spreads it across a long wooden table. The paper is yellowed, edges frayed, creases softened by repeated folding. But what draws your eye are the marks, not the stations, not the lines, not the carefully inked timetables, the routes that don't exist. The inspector taps the paper with one finger. The workers found this in the pocket of a missing conductor, the one from the train that never stopped. You run your fingers along, the largest of the false lines. It curves away from the main rails, slipping into sections of London where no track has ever been laid. Some end abruptly, others loop back on themselves like snared rope. A few plunge straight into the Thames, disappearing beneath drawn waves. But one path, a long, jagged line, runs deeper. This, the inspector says, tracing it with the tip of a pencil, was drawn over and over again, as if he wanted to carve it into the page. His voice drops lower, as if he needed someone to see it. The jagged line leads from the city centre to the outskirts, passing milepost 7, threading through abandoned sidings, plunging into a tangle of tunnels you do not recognize. At the end of the line, the conductor wrote a single word: "No return." Your spine numbs. "Where does this section go?" you ask. The inspector shakes his head. No official reports, no construction plans. According to the railway company, this route doesn't exist. And yet, he drew it. The inspector finishes. You study the map again. The ink varies in thickness. Some parts press so hard the nib tore slightly through the page. The jagged line is the darkest. Beneath it, faint smudges reveal earlier attempts to draw the same path. Shakier, uneven. It looks like he was drawing during motion, you whisper, on a moving train, or while something moved with him. The inspector murmurs. Your lantern flickers. The fog outside presses harder against the window. The telegraph clicks once a soft, errant tap that makes the inspector's jaw clench. You look closer at the map, noticing something you missed earlier. Along the jagged line are small symbols, circles, dashes, crosses. They repeat in a pattern, not random, not arbitrary. They're stops, you say, but not stations, the inspector replies. Look, he points. This one is near the site of the first body. This one near Shoreditch. This one, his finger pauses. Milepost 7. Your heartbeat stutters. You scan the other marks. 15 in total. Each one near a sighting, a disappearance, or a place where the rails trembled without reason. The inspector rolls his sleeves up. His forearms are marked with oil smears and scratches you don't remember from earlier. This conductor wasn't planning a route, he says. He was tracking something. You whisper the thought that forms in your mind, heavy as the fog outside. Tracking, where it travels. The inspector lifts the map, so the lantern light hits it fully. The lines shimmer faintly, not with ink, with something else. Something dusting the paper, dark, gritty, fine. Soot, but not from the lamps, from the rails. The inspector exhales. This isn't a map of the railway. You meet his gaze. It's a map of its movements. The fog outside the window thickens suddenly, swirling like breath pressed to the glass. And the telegraph, silent until now, clicks again, slow, steady, following the exact rhythm of the jagged line. One stop at a time. The fog begins earlier than usual, not drifting in from the river, not sliding along the brickwork in faint curls like it often does, but falling, sinking from the night sky, as though the darkness above has decided to descend and meet the city halfway. By the time you and the inspector reach the station yard, the lamps are nothing more than dim halos swallowed by a thickness that clings to the skin like damp wool. You pause at the entrance. The fog presses against your face, cold and almost weighted, as if it wants to feel the shape of you before letting you pass. The inspector lights his lantern, though it does little more than carve a trembling sphere of gold in front of him. "This isn't weather," he mutters. "You don't need convincing. Fog this dense has purpose. It moves with intent, sliding between arches, slipping along tracks, coiling around the signal posts with a cat-like patience. The yard is quiet, too quiet. No shifting crates, no murmurs from workers, no distant chug of locomotives cooling for the night. Just the soft hiss of fog brushing against metal. You follow the inspector toward the main platform. Each step feels swallowed, muffled, as though the ground beneath you has forgotten how to echo sound. The station clock stands tall above the fog line, its hands frozen at a time that passed nearly 20 minutes ago. "Stopped?" you whisper. "No," the inspector says. "Look closely." You squint. The hands tremble. They shiver rhythmically, twitching back and forth by fractions of seconds, like something is tapping the gears from inside. A faint scrape drifts across the platform. You turn sharply, lantern raised. The fog parts just enough to reveal the outline of a bench and something resting on it. A hat, not soaked from mist, not abandoned casually, placed precisely in the center of the bench, brim angled toward the tracks. The inspector moves toward it, but stops halfway. His shoulders stiffen. "Do you hear that?" he asks. At first you hear nothing. Then slowly the sound emerges soft, steady, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. You've heard it before. Under compartment floors, behind wooden walls, inside sealed carriages. Now it echoes across open air. The inspector steps closer to the bench. The fog behind it shifts, not dispersing, but moving, recoiling like something disturbed at its center. The tapping grows louder. You raise the lantern. What you see beneath the bench freezes your breath. Long, pale fingers curl around the wooden slats, not emerging fully, not reaching, only gripping the underside hard enough to bow the wood. The hand is too large, too thin, the knuckles sharp as stones pressing against stretched skin. The inspector whispers your name, a warning, a plea. The fingers tighten, the tapping stops. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, the hand slides back into the fog beneath the bench and disappears, leaving the wood warped from the pressure. Your heart pounds against your ribs, each beat louder than the next. The inspector grabs your arm. We need to leave. But before you can turn, the fog shifts violently, not swept by wind, not stirred by motion, but drawn aside like a curtain. Something moves along the tracks, not walking, not crawling, gliding. A shape, tall and impossibly narrow, passes between the rails, its edges blurred by fog, its outline bending in ways your eyes refuse to track. It glances toward you, or at least you think it does, a tilt of the head, a soft scrape of metal against metal. The lantern dims, your breath fogs the air, and the shape keeps moving, past you, beyond you, into the night where the fog refuses to lift, leaving the silence behind as its only footprint. The inspector tightens his grip on your arm. It's not waiting for trains anymore, he whispers, and as the fog coils once more around the rails, you understand the truth, settling like a cold stone beneath your ribs. Whatever hunts the line is beginning to hunt the city. You don't recognize him at first. The fog still clings to your coat as you and the inspector step back into the station hall, its cold breath lingering along your sleeves. The lamps burn low, their flames quivering like frightened eyes. The clerk's counter stands empty, the shutters half lowered, the papers beneath it shuffling slightly as if disturbed by an unseen hand. Then you see the shape near the far wall. A man, standing perfectly still, facing the timetable board. His posture is stiff, unnatural, shoulders drawn tight, chin tilted just slightly upward, as though listening to something above him. You feel a chill slide down your spine. The inspector notices your hesitation and follows your gaze. "Who is he?" the inspector whispers. You both step closer. The man wears a long wool coat, damp at the hem from fog. His hair hangs in thin, dark strands over the collar. But it's not his clothing that stops you in your tracks. It's the metal around his neck. A silver, collar smooth, unbroken, seamless, reflects the lantern light with a dull glow. Not jewelry, not ornament, something else entirely. Too wide to be fashionable, too tight to remove easily, too strange to ignore. You exchange a glance with the inspector. "Sir?" he calls softly. No answer. The man remains motionless, eyes fixed on the timetable as though studying the departures of trains that no longer run. You step closer, boots quiet on the floor. Something in the air thickens, a faint vibration, like standing near a telegraph wire humming with an unsent message. "Sir," you repeat. "Are you all right?" Slowly, impossibly slowly, the man turns his head. His eyes meet yours, hollow, glassy, unfocused. The pupils are wide, swallowing nearly all color, as though he's been staring into darkness for far too long. His lips part slightly, and then you see it. Soot, thin streaks of it at the corners of his mouth. The same soot you found on the journal. The same soot that clung to the locked compartments. The inspector steps forward cautiously. "Where did you come from?" The man blinks. When he speaks, his voice is a rasp, dry, cracked, like metal scraping iron. "It followed me." Your heart stops. The inspector's hand moves to your shoulder, steadying himself or you aren't sure. "What followed you?" he asks. The man doesn't look at him. His gaze fixes somewhere to your left, toward the tunnel entrance outside the station hall. It waits. he whispers. It watches through the steam. You feel the tremor beneath your boots. Subtle at first. A low, steady pulse. The man shivers, his fingers twitch, brushing the silver collar. You hear a faint click, a metallic tightening, as though the collar contracts with each beat of the tremor. "Where did you get that?" you ask quietly. "Who put it on you?" He exhales shakily. "They didn't put it on. It grew." Your blood goes cold. The inspector steps back. "Grew?" he repeats. The man nods, slow as sleep. From the fog, from the rails, from the thing beneath them. He raises a hand, trembling, skeletal, and points toward the tunnel. "It touched me," he murmurs, "and it marked me so it could find me again." The tremor underfoot sharpens, the station lamps flicker. Outside, from the direction of the tunnel, you hear a soft sound, a long, low scrape, metal dragging along stone. The sound grows clearer, closer, a deliberate rhythm that echoes through the hall. The man stiffens, eyes widening with terror. His fingers clutch the collar. "It's here," he gasps. "It knows I'm not alone." You grab his arm. "We need to go. Now." But the man pulls away sharply, shaking his head with frantic desperation. "It doesn't want you," he says. "Not yet." The inspector grabs him anyway, but the man convulses, body jerking, collar tightening with a metallic hiss. His eyes roll back. You both step away as the silver band pulses once, twice, then releases him. The man collapses forward, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. You kneel beside him. His chest rises once, falls, then nothing. The inspector touches the collar. It is warm, too warm, and on the metal's inner edge, faintly etched, are 3 identical claw-like marks, the same pattern carved into the rails, the beams, the sleepers. It found him, and now, as the fog thickens at the tunnel mouth and the tremor grows into a steady heartbeat, you feel the shape of realization settle like iron in your bones. It has begun marking its next destination, and you and the inspector are standing on the rails of its path. The telegraph room feels wrong the moment you step inside. Not dangerous, not hostile, just wrong in the quiet way abandoned places sometimes feel, as though the air remembers the last person who stood there and hasn't exhaled since. The inspector enters behind you, lantern raised, its glow catching on coils of wire and the polished brass keys lined neatly along the table. Usually, this room hums with life clicks, taps, the soft murmur of operators trading coded messages across the miles. Tonight, the silence lies heavy enough to bend the floorboards. You move toward the central desk. A stack of unsent telegrams sits there, edges curled, some written in hurried script. The inspector flips through them, his breath held tight in his throat. All addressed to the same man, a railway engineer named Thomas Welby, missing since dawn. You pull the last sheet from the bundle. The ink is blotted in places, as if the pen trembled or the writer kept glancing over his shoulder. You read the first line aloud. "Engine 49 making irregular noise. Possible axle issue. Will inspect between stations. Normal, rational." The kind of note engineers leave when something mechanical doesn't feel right under their boots. But the next line sharpens your breath. Noise coming from beneath cab, not from engine. Something moving. You exchange a look with the inspector. The third line is worse. Feels like someone knocking from under the carriage floor. Passenger reports tapping. Investigating. The inspector sets a hand on the table to steady himself. You lift the sheet closer to the lantern. The writing becomes shakier with each sentence. Whistle jammed, train speeding up, cannot slow. Your stomach drops. This note was written on the runaway train, the train that arrived driverless, the train that should have carried this engineer. You read the final scribbled lines, barely legible, the pen carving into the paper. Something beneath cab. Too fast. Moving, with wheels. Silver shape. Long fingers. The sentence ends abruptly, the line snapping as though the pen was torn from his hand. A soft scrape behind you makes both of you freeze. The inspector whirls toward the telegraph key. The machine sits motionless, but the floorboards beneath it tremble lightly, rhythmically. Not enough to shake dust free, but enough to feel in the marrow of your bones. You kneel, pressing your hand to the floor. The tremor pulses once, twice, then stops. The telegraph key clicks. Not a message, not a code, just a single tap. Then another. You lean in, breath shallow. The inspector steps back, lantern lifting higher. The key begins to move on its own. Tap, 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 tap. The same uneven rhythm you heard in the sealed compartment. The same pattern, etched into the rails. The same cadence Thomas Welby described. It's repeating something, the inspector whispers, but you shake your head. No, it's not repeating. The key taps again, faster now, insistent, urgent. It's responding. Your lantern flickers. Shadows ripple along the wall like something brushing past the plaster. The telegraph wire overhead vibrates violently, humming with a pitch that sounds too much like breath. Then, without warning, the lantern light dies. The room plunges into darkness. The telegraph erupts in frantic clicking, dozens of taps a second, the keys slamming as if invisible hands are striking them with feral force. The inspector shouts your name. You reach blindly, fingers brushing the edge of the desk. The floor vibrates beneath your knees. Something thuds softly against the underside of the telegraph table. A slow, deliberate knock from below. And then, a voice crackles through the dark. Not through the room, not from the inspector, through the telegraph itself. A metallic whisper, distorted by wire and distance. Help, beneath, cab, it's still, here. The sentence fractures, dissolves into static. The telegraph key slams down one final time, hard enough to splinter the wood. Then silence, complete, crushing, absolute. The inspector relights the lantern with shaking hands. As the flame steadies, your eyes fall on the telegraph table. A smear of soot stretches across the surface, not from machinery, not from coal, finger-shaped, 4 long streaks, pressed from below. The inspector exhales, voice breaking. Welby never left the train. You feel the cold settle around you, sinking into your bones as the truth unfolds like a shadow stretching across the rails. And whatever took him from beneath the cab has learned how to speak. The timetable board should not be moving, not at this hour, not with the station nearly empty, not with the clerks gone home and the night staff keeping their distance from the platforms. Yet when you and the inspector step back into the main hall, lantern light trembling across the tiled floor, you hear it a soft tick, tick, tick from the far wall, like fingernails grazing slate. You lift your lantern. The timetable's wooden panels shift, not smoothly, not with the mechanical flip of numbers and letters controlled by gears, but in slow, irregular jerks, as though an unseen hand presses the panels one by one. The inspector stiffens beside you. There's no one in the booth behind it, he whispers. He's right. You check the narrow window behind the board, dark, empty, no silhouette inside. The panels continue to click out of formation, forming new letters that jitter, struggle, then settle into place with uneven finality. You take one step closer. The platform, numbers at the top rearrange themselves. Trains that were delayed now read on time. Others scheduled for hours from now vanish entirely. And one line, previously blank, begins to appear in hesitant strokes. Special Service 213 A.M. You glance at the station clock. 1:58 A.M. There's no special service, you murmur. Not tonight. Not ever, the inspector adds. The panel flicks again. Destination. Unknown. A chill crawls along your spine. Passengers from earlier, the few who still linger, begin whispering nervously. A woman clutches her scarf. A man checks his pocket watch again and again, though the time never changes. Someone mutters about the fog thickening outside, swallowing the lamps until only faint orange smudges remain. The inspector steps forward. Stop it! He snaps at the board, as if speaking to a living thing. Stop whatever you're doing. The board trembles. All at once, every panel flips. A violent, clattering wave ripples. Across the board, the sound so loud it shakes dust from the rafters. You cover your ears. The inspector flinches. The noise rises into a frenzy, letters forming and dissolving faster than you can read. Then it stops. Silence. The final arrangement reads, "Train approaching platform 3, please stand clear." Your lantern flickers. Someone in the hall gasps. Another backs away from the platform doors. You and the inspector move slowly to the edge of the hall, peering into the thick fog that cloaks platform 3. Nothing. Not yet. Then, the rails hum. You feel it beneath your feet, a vibration that climbs from the timbers into your bones. But it's wrong. There's no rhythm of wheels, no distant rumble of an engine, just a steady pulse, as though the rails themselves are drawing breath. A station worker bursts through the fog, face pale as bone. "No train is coming," he cries. Signals are clear. Tracks empty, there's nothing out there. But the board says otherwise. Then, the lamps along the platform dim, one by one, as though something large passes silently by each of them. And through the fog, a faint glow begins to take shape. Not the warm yellow of a train lamp, not the white flare of an engine's headlight. A cold, bluish shimmer, like moonlight trapped in glass. Your breath tightens. The inspector grips your arm. "Back away," he murmurs. But you're rooted to the floorboards, staring as the glow intensifies, a shape forming, stretching, lengthening, as though carving itself out of the fog. A ghost of a carriage, a silhouette of a train. Empty, silent, approaching a platform it should not know exists. The timetable board flips one final time. Just once. A single word appears. Boarding. And the rails beneath you tremble, like something waking from a long sleep. You notice it first as a shadow that shouldn't exist. A faint smear along the window frame of the station master's office, a dark line thinning into dust at its edges, as though something brushed past the pane with deliberate slowness. The inspector stands beside you, his lantern casting a thin, wavering glow across the glass. Outside, the fog presses so tightly against the window that it feels like a living wall, breathing its cold onto the glass. But it's the soot that draws you in. Not ordinary soot. The station is full of that, drifting down from engines and lamps. This soot is darker, finer. It clings to the wood like ash from something burned far below the earth. You lift your gloved fingers and touch the line lightly. It crumbles, but not into ash, into grit, metallic grit, leaving a faint shimmer on your fingertips. The inspector frowns. "Where did that come from?" "Something touched the window," you answer quietly. "Something tall enough to reach 2 might." He glances at the exterior wall. Beneath the window is a drop, a full story down to the gravel path behind the platform. No ladder, no crates, nothing anyone could stand on. No human could have reached this high. The inspector raises the lantern, illuminating more of the frame. That's when you see the second smear higher than the first, near the top corner of the window, and beside it, faint but unmistakable, a streak. 3 lines, dragged downward, parallel, precisely the same as the gouges carved into rails and beams. Your skin tightens. You step back, scanning the office. It looks undisturbed, neat papers, an ink bottle still uncorked, the chair pushed in with the meticulousness of a man who believes in order. But the air is wrong, heavy, too warm near the window, as though someone or something stood there moments before, fogging the glass with breath. You wipe a circle clear with your sleeve. Through the thinning condensation, you see the outline of the platform beyond. Lamps dimmed by fog, the rails disappearing into darkness, the faint glow still hanging over platform 3, where the phantom train silhouette slowly faded into nothing minutes earlier. The inspector exhales shakily. "Something watched us." You nod, from inside the fog. But the soot, the height of the marks, the weight suggested by the smear, it wasn't simply watching. It was leaning in. The inspector studies the sill, squinting. "Look here. More." Another cluster of soot lies near the hinge, not streaked, not dragged, but pressed. An imprint, faint but unmistakable, the shape of fingers, long, too long, nearly twice the length of your own. They taper into points as though the tips are not bone but something sharper. You whisper, "It touched the window frame." The inspector's jaw tightens, checking the barrier. Only now do you realize how thin that barrier is. A pane of aged glass, a wooden frame slick with fog, a single glance, step between the station and whatever lurks beyond the platforms. A sudden knock jolts both of you. Soft, deliberate, directly behind you. You spin, heart seizing in your chest. But the sound didn't come from the window. It came from the office door. A station porter stands outside, trembling, his face white as frost. He points down the corridor with shaking fingers. "You need to come," he stammers. "Now." "What is it?" the inspector demands. The porter swallows hard. "The upstairs corridor. There's soot. On every window. Every one of them. Like something walked the length of the building and dragged its hand across the glass." You feel the cold settle behind your ribs. "Any footprints?" The porter nods, eyes wide and hollow. "Not on the ground," he whispers. "On the walls." The inspector stiffens. "Walls?" "Yes." The porter lifts his lantern, revealing smears of soot along the far corner where brick meets ceiling. High, as if it was climbing. You look back at the window, at the streaks still clinging there like the residue of a vanished breath. Something is no longer just stalking the rails. It has begun to climb the buildings, to circle the rooms, to learn the shapes of doors and windows. And as the fog outside thickens again, heavy, purposeful, you feel an awful certainty settle in your bones. Whatever moves in the darkness no longer needs the trains to travel. It can come for anyone, anywhere, at any height. The first raindrops fall like warnings. Not gentle, not cleansing, but sharp, cold, metallic, as though the sky has mixed soot with water before letting it fall. You and the inspector stand beneath the awning of the outer platform, watching the fog thicken into a moving wall. The lamps bleed yellow halos across the wet planks. Each raindrop hisses when it hits the rails, steam rising in wisps like the faint exhale of something just beneath the surface. "What time is it?" you ask quietly. The inspector checks his watch, then frowns. "Still 2:13. You glance up. The station clock reads the same. Frozen. Still. Trapped in the moment the phantom train appeared. Rain slides down the clock face in thin, trembling lines. Then you hear it. A whistle. Faint at first, distant, questioning, barely a ripple in the wet air. Not the full-throated call of a steam engine, but a softer tone. Mournful, uncertain, as though the whistle itself isn't powered by steam, but by breath. Human breath. The inspector stiffens. No trains are running tonight. You know this. Every line has been suspended until the fog lifts. Every station official is accounted for. Every locomotive has been locked in its shed. But the whistle blows again. Longer this time. And closer. You step toward the edge of the platform. Rain patters harder on your coat. The fog shifts in slow waves, pulsing like the chest of something sleeping. The inspector raises his lantern, the flame flickering nervously. The rails begin to hum. At first, the vibration is subtle, a shiver beneath the planks. Then stronger still. Water pools between the sleepers, forming trembling circles with each pulse. The inspector kneels, pressing 2 fingers to the rail. "It's vibrating," he murmurs. "But there's no engine, nothing creating the motion." The whistle sounds again. This time, it's unmistakably close. So close you can hear the faint echo bouncing off the station, bricks, as if the sound came from inside the fog only a few yards down the line. Another pulse travels along the rails, heavy, deliberate, nothing to do with locomotives or pistons or steam. It's a living rhythm, a heartbeat. You tighten your grip on the lantern. Something moves in the fog. Not a train, not even a shape. A pressure, a presence. The fog bulges outward, expanding around something large that presses through it, distorting the air. The rain hits its outline and slides down in sheets, revealing fleeting curves, a hint of metal, the vague suggestion of a carriage window. But the shape flickers, wavers, phases, like an apparition trying to remember what a train is supposed to look like. The whistle shrieks a jagged, anguished cry that rattles the glass behind you. The inspector grabs your arm. Back. Get back. But your feet refuse to move, because inside the shimmering outline of the thing emerging from the fog, you see movement, a figure, tall, thin, walking where a floor should be. Its hands trail along the air where the walls of a train should stand, not touching wood or glass, but touching the memory of them. Long fingers glide along invisible contours as though tracing something only it can see, and then it stops. Slowly, it turns toward the platform. You feel its attention hit you like cold water. The lantern flickers, sputters, nearly dies. The inspector pulls you back by force. Rain pounds harder, masking the sound of your breath. The figure lifts one hand and presses it against the air between you, right where a carriage window would be. The whistle blows one final time. Not mechanical, not distant. A whisper, pushed through metal that no longer exists. The figure withdraws. The fog collapses inward. The rails fall silent. The rain becomes just rain again. You collapse against the railing, chest heaving. The inspector leans beside you, his voice thin. It's learning to appear without the train. You swallow hard. The whistle still echoes faintly in your skull, not fading the way sound should, but lingering, circling, settling into the quiet spaces between your heartbeat. You realize with a sinking dread, it wasn't calling a train, it was calling you. You're halfway through drying your coat by the station's lone potbelly stove when the inspector appears in the doorway, drenched from the rain, holding a thin envelope between two fingers as though it might burn him. "It was left on my desk," he says quietly. "No one saw who put it there." You take the envelope. It is damp, cold and feather-light. Inside is a single folded newspaper clipping. Old, the paper has yellowed, corners softened by time. The print is faded in places, the edges torn as though ripped from a bound volume in haste. You open it slowly, the soft crackle of brittle newsprint echoing through the empty room. The headline stops your breath mid-chest. Mysterious, vanishing on the London-Brighton line passenger. Taken by the fog? Published the 12th of April, 1849, 20 years ago. You and the inspector exchange a look, the kind that carries more weight than any spoken fear. "Read it," he murmurs. You smooth the paper and begin. A gentleman identified as Mr. Edwin Mallory, a barrister of respectable standing, disappeared last night while travelling alone in a first-class compartment. The train arrived in Brighton, but Mr. Mallory did not. His luggage remained untouched, his coat folded neatly, his seat still warm. Your pulse quickens. The words mirror the events of the last days too closely to ignore. The article continues. Witnesses reported hearing an unusual scraping beneath the carriage floor during the journey. A guard described feeling a tremor, like something crawling under the wheels. Upon inspection, marks were found on the rail, 3 deep, parallel lines etched into the metal. You stop reading. The inspector meets your eye. 3 marks. You nod, throat tightening. The clipping isn't finished. This is not the first such occurrence. Railway staff whisper of similar incidents unreported, dismissed, ignored, stretching back nearly a decade. Always the fog, always the tremors, always a passenger traveling alone. Beneath the paragraph is a crude illustration, an artist's attempt to depict the superstition, described by frightened conductors at the time. A dark figure, tall, indistinct, clinging to the underside of a carriage, its limbs too long, its hands ending in points that scrape the rails. You feel the room grow colder, but the last part is what truly freezes you. Local legend speaks of something old that walks the lines, a shadow born from the first rails laid in the marshlands, a thing that moves between trains and fog. The workers call it the passenger beneath. You whisper the name aloud. It tastes like iron and dread. The inspector paces, lantern light quivering across his face. This isn't new. It didn't start with us. It didn't start with the runaway train. Your fingers tighten around the clipping. It's been traveling the rails for decades. He stops pacing, looks at you, and says the part neither of you wants to accept. It adapts. The stove pops softly, the heat unable to chase the cold crawling up your spine. You study the illustration again, the exaggerated limbs, the hollow shape, the darkness clinging to it like smoke. "What does it want?" you whisper. The inspector doesn't answer. Instead, he unfolds the clipping further, revealing a handwritten note scrawled on the back in hurried, frantic strokes. If you are reading this, it knows you. Do not look for it. It looks back. You stare at the note until the letters blur. Then you hear it, a sound beyond the wall. Faint, but unmistakable. A scrape, a tremor, a breath passing through the floorboards. You close your eyes. The newspaper clipping trembles in your hands. And somewhere in the fog outside the station, something tall and patient shifts its weight, the rails humming with the recognition of your name. The cutting stretches before you like a wound carved through the earth. Rain drips from the edges of the stone embankments, running down in slow rivulets that hiss when they hit the rails below. The fog curls low, dense, turning the open trench into a tunnel of shadows that breathe with a life of their own. You step carefully along the narrow path at the top, lantern in hand, the flame quivering with every gust of wind that snakes through the cuttings. The inspector follows behind, silent, eyes darting along the wet stone. "This is where the sightings started," he murmurs, voice low enough for only you to hear. "Mile post 7, the first body. And now, this." He gestures toward a faint glow ahead, barely visible through the fog. You squint. A lantern. Somewhere in the cutting, far below, light flickers. It doesn't belong. Not to workers. Not to the maintenance crew. Not to any of the patrols who check this line before sunrise. The glow sways, thin, delicate, almost human, in rhythm. But you know better. Lanterns are not alive. Not like this. You descend carefully, feet slipping on wet stone. Every step echoes in the trench, muffled only slightly by the thickening fog. The smell of damp earth and oil fills your nostrils, mingling with the faint metallic tang that you've grown to recognize, the scent of the rails disturbed, of something moving along them without wheels or weight. Closer now. The lantern grows brighter. You crouch behind a rise of earth, straining to see. The light swings in wide arcs, too precise, too deliberate. And then a figure emerges, partially obscured by fog and shadow, tall, thin. Its form bends in ways impossible for any man or animal. The lantern clings to its hand, yet the flame does not flicker, as though wind and rain cannot touch it. You hear the soft scrape again, not from the lantern, not from the figure, beneath it, along the rails. The same 3 parallel marks, the same rhythm, slow, deliberate, unending. Something travels along the line with a consciousness you cannot comprehend. The figure lifts the lantern higher. Its head tilts toward the cutting wall, revealing a shadow where a face should be. The rails hum beneath it, vibrating in response to each step. It takes not human steps, but measured, crawling, exacting. You want to speak. You want to call out. Your throat locks. Even the inspector, standing silently behind you, does not breathe. The lantern swings toward a small outbuilding halfway down the cutting. Its door is ajar. Soot stains the threshold. The figure bends slightly, stepping inside as though it belongs there, and yet you see the glow linger in the mist for a heartbeat longer before vanishing altogether. You and the inspector move cautiously forward. Each rail beneath your feet hums faintly, the vibration slipping into your bones. You step into the outbuilding, empty. The lantern inside does not exist. The walls are smeared with wet soot, the same color and texture as the tracks, the windows, the compartments, all of it marking a path no human could have traced. A soft thud echoes behind you. Something has shifted along the rails outside, just beyond the fog's reach. You lift your lantern. The cutting is empty again. Still, you feel it, waiting, watching, learning. The inspector exhales, a long, silent hiss of air. "It moves between places now," he says. "It doesn't need the trains to travel. It only needs the rails." You stare at the walls, the empty space, the soot-covered threshold. The lantern, though gone, still flickers in your mind. You understand. Somewhere in the darkness, Along the cuttings, something moves with the precision of a predator, marking each step, each pause, each place it waits for its next passenger, and you know, with a cold certainty, that sooner or later it will turn toward this platform. You reach the section of line where the rails were reported missing. Fog curls around the embankments like smoke from a fire long since extinguished. The sleepers are wet, slick, the wood darkened by rain, but the steel rails themselves seem incomplete. Your boots strike solid metal for a moment, then nothing. A hollow where the track should be, yawning like a wound in the earth. The inspector crouches beside you, fingers tracing the damp timber, counting the gaps with deliberate care. "They shouldn't be gone," he mutters, voice low. "There's no reason for this." You nod, noting the same rails that vanish only to reappear farther down the line, displaced as if carried by an unseen hand. The fog presses closer, smelling of wet stone and soot, and the air vibrates faintly beneath your boots. Not from wind, not from passing trains, something deeper, beneath the surface. You step forward carefully. The first gap swallows your foot halfway to the ankle. Cold water, or mud? You cannot tell. The vibration beneath you grows subtle, insistent. The same rhythm you've felt beneath platforms, inside compartments, under sealed floors. The heartbeat of the rails. The heartbeat of whatever moves along them. The inspector leans close. "Look here." 2 parallel marks scratch the wood where a rail should be, gouges long and precise, tapering into the soft earth, then disappearing into fog. They match the ones carved into the platforms, the undercarriages, the floors. Someone is dragging along the path, leaving only the memory of weight. You move forward, lantern held high, fog pressing against your face, wetting your hair and dripping into your coat. You step across another missing stretch. Nothing but hollow space beneath your boots. The vibration rises with each step, synchronized with your pulse, synchronized with something that doesn't belong to the human world. A sound breaks the silence, the faint scrape of metal against metal. Far below, somewhere under the ground, you freeze. The inspector's hand clamps on your shoulder. "It's beneath us," he whispers. "Beneath the rails themselves." You swallow. The thought curls in your stomach like ice. Not alongside the rails, not moving with them, but beneath. Watching, learning, pulling. The fog shifts. A pale glow catches your eye, a faint gleam from the direction of the next section where rails reappear. Lantern light reflects oddly on it, bending strangely, almost like liquid steel. You squint. The rails ahead are whole again, shining faintly in the mist. But the vibration grows stronger not only beneath your boots but in the air, around your ribs, inside your chest. The inspector steps forward. "It's marking its path," he says quietly. "It disappears, rails, leaves, gouges, notes where we walk. It's mapping us." You swallow hard, keeping your lantern steady. Each step now carries hesitation. Each vibration presses into your mind like a whispered warning. You feel the absence of the rails as strongly as their presence, a hollowed weight in the earth beneath you, guiding your movement. Another scrape, louder, sharper, from below, from behind. You glance back. Nothing, just fog. But the air carries a subtle pressure, a sense of awareness. The cuttings, the embankments, the rails themselves, all alive with it. You step across the final missing section and stand where the metal rejoins solidly. The faint glow disappears into the fog. The parallel gouges run continuously to where you now stand. Something has moved before you, leaving the tracks incomplete only to reappear ahead. It has learned the landscape. It has learned the motion of the night, and it waits. The inspector exhales, lips tight. Every time we follow it, the line itself changes. You nod, hands gripping the lantern. The rails tremble faintly, and somewhere, deep beneath, you hear it. A single scrape, deliberate, growing nearer. The line is no longer passive. It is alive, and it is hunting. You hear her story in whispers. The station is quiet now, too quiet. Fog presses through the arches like a living thing, winding around lantern posts and curling across the wet platform planks. You sit on a bench, lantern between your knees, as the woman folds her hands over her lap, fingers trembling. Her eyes dart to every shadow, every swaying gas lamp, but she refuses to look down the line. "I should not have been traveling alone," she begins, voice barely more than a rasp. "I got on at milepost 7. The carriage was empty except for me, and something else." You lean closer, careful not to startle her. The inspector crouches opposite, lantern casting a trembling halo across the trio of you. Outside, the rails hum faintly, the familiar, impossible pulse vibrating through the station, through your bones, through the fog itself. "What did you see?" you whisper. She swallows hard, eyes fixed on the platform beyond the arches. It was something tall, longer than a man. It moved with the train, but not in the train. Beneath it, along the floorboards. She shivers violently. It watched me, and the tapping I heard. It was counting my steps. You remember the tremor beneath your boots, the clicks on the telegraph, the scratches in the rails and compartments. The pattern repeats in your mind like a pulse you cannot escape. She continues. "When the train slowed near Shoreditch, I thought I could see its shape in the reflection of the carriage window. Not fully, not clearly, but there was a figure, something with long, thin arms, dragging along the wood, bending unnaturally. Its fingers scraped the floor. The noise echoed, so precise, so deliberate. You shiver. Her words match every mark, every tremor, every pulse of dread you've encountered on this line. You glance at the inspector. He nods subtly, the same understanding passing between you both. The story aligns with the evidence, too perfectly, too impossibly. "And then?" you prompt. "It climbed into the corner of the carriage," she whispers, leaning forward as if the fog itself might hear. "I thought it would grab me. I thought—" Her voice breaks. She presses a hand over her mouth. "I thought it would take me too." The rails hum beneath the station again, a vibration that seems almost sympathetic to her fear. "But it didn't," she finishes. "For a moment, it lingered, then it went, slid beneath the carriage, vanished into the fog outside the platform." The lantern light flickers violently. You and the inspector glance toward the rails. Empty, silent, nothing moves, and yet the space feels charged, electric, as though the entity she described still lingers, just beyond the veil of fog. "You were lucky," you murmur, voice tight. "Most, they don't come back." Her eyes meet yours, hollow, glassy, yet sharp. "I don't know if luck saved me," she says, "or if it allowed me to leave, so it could learn my face, my weight, the rhythm of my steps." The inspector exhales. "It learns." She nods once, sharply, and it waits, always waits, for the next one, the next passenger traveling alone, the next compartment sealed from the inside, the next breath in the dark. Rain begins again, tapping lightly against the station roof, hissing along the ironwork like a warning. The lantern flickers, casting shadows across the fog that seem to sway independently of wind or flame. You feel the pulse beneath the floorboards, a slow, deliberate vibration, and understand fully, impossibly, that the tracks themselves have taken note of her presence, recorded every step, every heartbeat. The line hums with awareness, watching, learning, preparing. You glance at the woman. Her hands are folded tightly now, her knuckles white. Her breath comes in shallow gasps. Outside, the fog thickens, pressing closer to the platform, and in the silence, punctuated only by the hum of the time, rails. You know, it will return, and the next passenger may not be so lucky. You finally see it, the mask, not the kind fashioned from leather or brass, polished and hollow, the kind men wore to masquerade at balls or for play. No, this is older, ancient in its design, yet impossibly present, as though carved from fog and iron, hammered from shadows themselves. You stumble across it in the last carriage of the abandoned line, lying atop a bench with a careless precision that makes your stomach twist. The inspector stands behind you, lantern raised, casting long, trembling light across the compartment. Every corner seems deeper, every shadow reaching further than it should. The mask's features are smooth, pale as porcelain, except for the eyes' narrow slits, impossibly dark, as if the air inside absorbs everything that looks at it. You lift the lantern closer. The edges of the mask glint faintly with a metallic hue, catching reflections from somewhere you cannot see. Tiny scratches streak the surface, etched into it with a deliberate hand, or perhaps the hand of something far older, something that knows how to carve fear into objects as easily as flesh. The inspector's voice breaks the silence. "It's not human," he whispers. "At least, not in any way we can understand." You kneel to touch the mask, cold, hard. Yet beneath the surface, a faint warmth pulses, a subtle rhythm like a heartbeat that echoes the tremor you felt beneath the rails, beneath the platforms, beneath every compartment. Something lives in it. Something remembers. You glance back toward the window. Fog curls along the glass, moving as though it has a will of its own. Outside, the rails hum faintly, a deliberate, slow vibration, synchronized with the pulse of the mask. You realize, with a chill sinking deep into your chest, that the mask is not merely an object. It is a node, a conduit. The being you've been following, the one that scratches the rails, inhabits the compartments, rides the phantom trains, has left a trace of itself here. A low scrape echoes along the floorboards. You freeze. The inspector tenses. The sound grows. Deliberate like the tapping of elongated fingers against iron. Your lantern flickers violently, and the shadows in the compartment stretch and twist. "Did it come here?" you whisper. The inspector shakes his head. "It's already been here, and it's still learning." You examine the mask again, noticing now faint streaks of soot along its edges. The same soot found on the compartments, the windowsills, the journal, and the rails themselves. Patterns scratched across its surface are identical to the grooves gouged into the tracks. A signature, a map, a warning. The lantern tilts. Shadows converge along the back of the carriage. A movement, imperceptible but unmistakable, brushes against your shoulder. You spin. Nothing. Only the mask, resting silently on the bench, as if smiling beneath its blank, pale facade. You step back. The vibration under your boots intensifies. The fog presses at the open door, curling into the carriage, coiling around your legs, tugging at the corners of the mask, as though testing whether you will take it with you. The inspector exhales, voice low, almost reverent. "Whatever we're dealing with, it's patient. It doesn't just kill. It teaches. It observes. And now we've seen its face." The mask gleams faintly in the lantern light. Its dark eyes slit toward you, unblinking, aware. Somewhere in the distance, the rails hum again, the slow, deliberate pulse echoing through the station and into the fog. And you know, without needing to see, without needing to hear, that it will be back. The station platform is slick with rain, fog curling through the arches, like smoke from a fire that never burned out. You and the inspector step carefully across the wet planks, lantern held high, the light trembling with every gust of wind that snakes through the open roof. The rails glint faintly in the dim glow, slick with water, but vibrating beneath your boots with a pulse that seems alive. The story you've followed for days, tremors under the platforms, missing compartments, phantom passengers, and the mask resting in the last carriage all converges now on this final site. A train approaches, but it does not move like a normal locomotive. It glides with a grace that should be impossible for a machine built of iron and steam. No hiss of pistons, no screech of wheels on the curves, only a low, steady hum that vibrates through the air and into your chest. You notice immediately, the cab is empty. No driver, no fireman, not a single human figure occupies the controls. Yet the lanterns of the engine glow faintly, and the brass fittings shine wetly, reflecting the pale light of the fog. The inspector's hand clamps on your shoulder. "It's not bound by rules anymore," he says softly. It moves with its own will. The pulse beneath the rails grows stronger as the train glides closer. You step forward, lantern shaking, light spilling across the wet metal. The familiar 3 parallel marks appear along the sleeper's gouges deep enough to catch the edge of your boot. Every step the train takes seems to resonate through the wood beneath you, as though the rails themselves are straining to contain it. Then, from below the platform, a scrape echoes, the same rhythm you've been following for days. Slow, deliberate, impossible. You realize with a sinking chill that the entity moving along the tracks is beneath the train as well, guiding it, riding it, learning from it. The fog swirls, and for a moment, you see movement inside the engine compartment, not human. Limbs too long, bending in ways impossible for flesh. Fingers brushing the brass levers, the gauges, the wheels, but no face, no body, only the suggestion of a presence, riding the train as though it has inhabited it since the first sleeper was laid. You step back, heart hammering. The inspector grips your arm. "We've been following it, yes," he whispers, "but it's been leading us too. Every mark, every tremor, every missing rail, all part of its design." The train slides past the platform, slow and deliberate, its whistle a hollow, metallic cry that pierces the fog without warning. The air vibrates with it, and you feel a deep resonance in your bones, a connection between the train, the tracks, and the thing that moves unseen beneath them. You stare as it disappears into the fog, the rails humming in the aftermath like a heartbeat left behind. The lantern in your hand wavers, the flame threatening to die. Rain patters on the platform, the drops cold and heavy, but the pulse of the tracks remains faint, deliberate, endless. The inspector exhales, voice tight with exhaustion and awe. "It doesn't just ride the rails," he murmurs. "It owns them." You look down at the wooden boards beneath your feet, the glint of iron, the lingering traces of soot, and understand fully, as the fog presses in close, curling around the platform and your ankles, whatever it is, it will always return, and the rails will remember. The letters arrive without warning. First, a single envelope, thick and coarse, slipped under the inspector's office door. Then more, each one identical in weight, paper, and the faint metallic tang that seems to cling to your fingers even after you let them go. The handwriting is precise, deliberate, looping with a care that is almost polite, almost casual, yet the words themselves are anything but. You hold the first letter up to the lantern. The ink glimmers faintly, black against grey paper, and the letters almost seem to shift as your eyes move across them. "I have been watching you, always." The rails remember you. The fog knows your name. You feel the tremor again beneath your boots, faint, insistent, as if the words themselves pulse in rhythm with the unseen entity that has haunted the line for days. The inspector leans closer, voice low, almost trembling. This isn't handwriting. It's a map, a warning, a promise. His finger traces the loops of the ink. It knows more about the train, the tracks, and the stations than anyone could. It knows everything we've done. You step back, heart hammering. A second letter flutters to the floor, untouched by human hands, as though carried on a draft that shouldn't exist. You catch it instinctively, and the words nearly burn themselves into your retina. He travels below, between, and inside the carriages. Beware the first-class seats. Beware the empty compartments. Never ride alone. You glance at the inspector. His face is pale in the lantern light. It wants you to read them, he mutters, but it also wants you to fear. The letters continue to arrive over the next hours, each one more urgent than the last. The writing changes, subtly loops sharper, letters stretching taller, dots punctuating the lines like a heartbeat in the fog. They speak of the missing passengers, the displaced rails, the tremors beneath the platforms. They speak of compartments sealed from the inside, of the metallic scratches along the beams, of footprints that vanish before reaching the ground. You feel the heat in your chest, a rising panic that presses against your ribs like steam in a locomotive boiler. The fog presses against the windows, curling around the edges of the inspector's office like a living thing. The tremor beneath the floor intensifies, pulsing faster now, synchronized with each new letter that appears. You set the lantern on the desk, hands shaking, trying to stabilize the pages. The last letter is different. It is heavier, the ink darker, almost black in its finality. The message is simple: you are next. Stand alone, ride alone, and it will find you. Your throat closes. You glance at the inspector, who looks as though he has aged years in the space of minutes. The metallic tang of the letters lingers in the air, sharp and unyielding, almost as if the entity itself is present in the room with you, observing your every reaction. The tremor beneath the floorboards grows into a low, insistent pulse, echoing through the beams and rails outside. You realize with a sinking certainty that the letters were never meant to be read calmly. They were meant to direct attention, to teach fear, to prepare those who follow for what waits beyond the fog and beneath the rails. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond the station, the faintest scrape begins again, deliberate, steady, waiting for its next passenger. The fog presses against the city like a living shroud, curling through alleys and along the gaslit streets with a deliberate patience. You step carefully from the platform toward the streets above, boots slick with rainwater, lantern trembling in your hands. The hum of the rails beneath the city has changed. No longer distant, it thrums through the very foundation of Euston Road, low and insistent, a pulse that seems alive. Voices reach your ears, first faint, echoing from beneath the stone. Not human voices, not spoken aloud, but murmurs that crawl along the walls and up through the floorboards. You glance at the inspector beside you. His expression is taut, his fingers curled around the lantern handle. "They've been here before," he murmurs. Beneath the city, the tunnels, the cuttings, listening. The whispers grow clearer as you approach a service grate near the edge of the road. Tiny syllables, almost forming words, slide upward through the metal mesh. You crouch, pressing your ear close, trying to catch the meaning. The hum of the unseen rails blends with the whispers, vibrating through your skull, merging with the rhythm you've followed for days. Step, step, follow, fear. The cadence is unmistakable, deliberate, and meant to guide you, trap you. A sudden scrape echoes beneath your feet. You jump back. The inspector presses his hand to your shoulder, his own eyes scanning the foggy street. There, across the rain-darkened cobbles, the metal rails of a disused siding glint faintly, disappearing into the mist. The grooves along their edges catch the lantern light 3 deep, parallel marks running the length of the rails, continuing beyond where your vision can follow. Every mark tells the same story: presence, movement, intelligence. You inch closer to the grate, heart hammering. The whispers surge, pressing upward as if responding to your approach. A shadow flits within the fog below, too quick, too subtle to identify, but unmistakably deliberate. Long fingers curl along the edges of pipes and beams, dragging along surfaces that should be unmarked. The metallic tang rises, sharp and cold, clinging to your coat and your skin. The inspector kneels beside the grate, lifting it with slow precision. Darkness yawns below. You shine your lantern into the tunnel, light catching damp bricks, iron beams, and a thin trail of soot stretched along the floor. The smell is heavy, wet earth and metal, faintly sweet, clinging like a warning. You notice the faintest scrape along the walls, deep enough to be felt through the lantern's vibration. Something has moved here recently. Not a worker, not an animal. Something that knows the paths of men and the tremors of the rails. You take a step back, shaking slightly, lantern trembling in your hand, the whispers crescendo, blending with the hum beneath the floor. And for a brief moment, you see a shape tall, elongated, fluid moving beneath the city like water. It pauses, and the faint blue glow of something metallic glimmers against the stone. Its attention seems to fix on you, and a chill runs down your spine. The inspector exhales slowly, voice low. "It knows we're here," he says. It's been watching this street for years, waiting for someone to follow. The tremor grows stronger, pulses racing through the foundations, up through the grate, resonating in your chest. You realize fully, whatever hunts the lines does not need the trains. It moves beneath, above, everywhere. And tonight, Euston Road has become part of its path. The buffer beam lies exposed beneath the last carriage you follow along the siding. Rain beads along its surface, hissing softly as the droplets hit the metal. But it is not the rain that makes you shiver. Something else clings there. Something dark, thick, impossibly old. You lean closer, lantern trembling in your hand, and see it. Streaks of blood, not fresh, but preserved in a way that suggests it has soaked into the metal over time, etched with deliberate force. The inspector crouches beside you, eyes narrow. "It's not human," he murmurs. "Not completely. Something has been leaving marks along the trains, the rails, the platforms, and now here." He traces a gloved finger along the beam, and the vibration beneath your boots intensifies, faint but undeniable, as if the rails themselves hum in recognition of the presence. You step back, heart pounding. Your breath fogs in the cold air, mingling with the mist that curls around the carriage and pools along the rails. The smell of iron is strong, metallic, sharp, and almost sweet, the same scent that has clung to every object touched by whatever moves along the line. You glance down at the wooden sleepers. Parallel gouges stretch along the metal like scars, familiar now, telling a story in the language of scratches and vibrations. The inspector lifts the lantern, letting its glow spill across the buffer beam. You see tiny flecks of soot embedded in the metal, the same fine dust that has been left behind on windowsills, in compartments, even on the journal pages you studied earlier. Each particle seems deliberate, a marker, a breadcrumb meant to be followed by someone who dares trace the path. A soft scraping reaches your ears, almost imperceptible over the rain and wind. You freeze, trying to locate it. The sound comes from beneath the carriage, deliberate, slow, dragging along the metal. It pauses, then moves again, leaving faint echoes in the beams and joints. You press closer, the lantern, shaking in your hand. Each pulse resonates through the rails and into your bones. The inspector straightens, voice low. It's learning. Every mark it leaves, every pulse in the metal, it's mapping the movement of men, the patterns of the city. It's more than a predator. It's an architect. You step closer to the beam, compelled despite the unease curling in your stomach. The blood is thick, sticky, yet it seems to shift under your gaze, forming subtle patterns, repeating shapes that mimic the gouges in the rails. You realize with a jolt that these marks are not random, they are deliberate, communicating something you cannot yet comprehend. A distant whistle cuts through the fog, eerie and hollow, and you glance toward the platform. No train is coming. The rails beneath your boots tremble again, synchronizing with the rhythm of the scratches on the buffer beam. The mist swirls in the carriage corners as if alive, curling toward the glow of the lantern, and you feel the presence of something enormous, patient, waiting. The inspector exhales sharply, voice barely audible. It doesn't just follow the trains anymore. It inhabits them. Every carriage, every rail, every platform bears its memory. And this is the record of what it has done. You step back, the lantern light catching the glint of the rails. The fog thickens. The pulse beneath your feet grows stronger. And somewhere ahead, in the endless corridor of rails, the scraping begins again. Slow, deliberate, inevitable. The carriage waits in silence, the platform empty except for the fog curling low along the edges, and the hum of the rails beneath your boots. You step closer, lantern held high, light trembling against the damp wood. The seat is empty, but the air feels occupied, heavy, as though someone has just stepped out, yet the door was locked from the inside. Your hands tighten around the lantern handle, and the inspector leans close, peering into the shadows where no human could stand. You notice the small details first. A cuff pressed against the upholstery, the faint imprint of a heel on the floorboard, a thin smear of soot along the window edge. None of it belongs to anyone currently on the platform. The pulse beneath the rails grows stronger, synchronized with the faintest tapping inside the carriage, a rhythm you recognize from previous sightings, the cadence of something moving with intelligence, deliberate and unyielding. The inspector steps forward, voice low. "It's gone," he says, "but it left a trace." His hand hovers over the seat, fingers brushing the thin line of soot. Everything it touches remembers it. You kneel, examining the floor beneath the seat. Parallel gouges run across the wooden boards, the metal beneath faintly exposed in narrow streaks. They match the marks along the buffer beam, the missing tracks, the scratched platforms. Someone or something has walked these corridors before, and the pattern repeats with precision, as though it knows the layout better than any human could. A distant whistle echoes through the fog. You glance toward the tracks. No train approaches. The vibration in the rails beneath your boots intensifies, subtle at first, then deliberate, as if the ground itself is warning you. The carriage seems to shift slightly, though nothing inside moves. The lantern flickers, casting elongated shadows across the upholstery, shadows that bend unnaturally, stretching along the floor like fingers reaching toward you. The inspector gestures toward the window. The glass is streaked with a thin film of soot, smeared as though someone pressed against it from inside the carriage. You step closer. The streaks curl in patterns, looping back toward the seat, toward the floor. The imprint of something too tall, too long-limbed, stretches across the frame. You feel it before you see it. The same weight, the same presence, as if someone is still crouched just beyond perception, waiting for you to move. A low scrape reverberates from beneath the carriage, slow and methodical. You freeze, heartbeat echoing with the rhythm. The inspector mutters under his breath. It doesn't leave footprints in the gravel anymore. Only here, in the wood, in the metal, the rails carry its path. You glance at the empty seat again. Your mind races through all the disappearances, the sealed compartments, the tremors, the masked figure. Every single incident leads back here, to this pattern, to this repetition. And as the pulse beneath the rails grows louder, synchronized with a subtle shift in the fog outside, the truth settles like ice in your stomach. The passenger is never truly gone. It only disappears to teach, to mark, to wait, and eventually it will choose its next passenger. The platform lies empty now, fog curling in thick ribbons along the rails, hiding the tracks beyond in a grey haze that swallows light and sound alike. You stand at the edge, lantern in hand, its glow barely piercing the mist. The hum beneath the rails grows steadily, rhythmic, insistent, a pulse that travels up your legs and into your chest, as if the tracks themselves are alive, breathing. The inspector stands beside you, lantern angled toward the sleepers. He is quiet, hands gripping the handle tightly, eyes scanning the fog like a man who knows something you cannot yet name. "Every mark," he murmurs, "every scratch, every tremor, every gouge in the wood or metal, it remembers. Everything that happens on these lines, it keeps." You kneel to examine the rails. Faint grooves run parallel along the metal edges, worn into polished steel by weight, by presence. You can feel them with your fingers, not just tactile, but a strange resonance, as though the rails are vibrating in sympathy with some unseen force. Every inch seems purposeful, deliberate, a language written in iron and memory. A soft tapping reaches your ears, not from a train, not from human feet. Something moves beneath the sleepers, deliberate, measured. You glance at the inspector. He nods subtly, understanding without words. The entity you've been tracing, the one that rides the rails, scratches the floors, leaves the marks. It has learned, it has recorded, and now it observes. You rise, lantern illuminating the fog. The platform feels smaller, constrained, alive with attention. You step forward carefully, boots pressing into the wood, and the rails shiver faintly beneath your weight. Another tap, sharp, deliberate, coming from the same rhythm you've traced for days. Your skin prickles, the hair on your neck rising. The fog seems to lean in, wrapping around the lantern light, carrying a chill that seeps into your bones. The inspector points down the line, voice barely audible. Look. You follow his gesture. The tracks extend straight into the mist, uninterrupted, but you can see the faintest undulation, a subtle movement along the edges, as though the rails themselves breathe, flex, adjust. The scratches, gouges, traces of soot, they are etched into every surface along the path, repeating, marking, remembering. You take a deep breath. Every disappearance, every sealed compartment, every tremor and whisper, it is all recorded here. The entity doesn't just move, it archives, it maps. The rails are no longer inert steel and timber. They are a living ledger, a record of every passenger, every step, every heartbeat, and it waits for the next entry. A low whistle cuts through the fog, not mechanical, not human. You recognize it immediately, the cry that has echoed in your mind since the first tremor. The pulse beneath the rails quickens. The fog curls tighter, heavier, as if pressing down to conceal what moves along the tracks. You feel it before you see it. A shape, fluid, elongated, sliding along the rails like smoke given form. Its fingers trail over the steel, brushing the scratches, following the recorded paths. It pauses, almost aware of your gaze. Then it melts back into the mist, leaving only the memory of its presence. The inspector exhales, lantern trembling in his hands. The rails remember everything, he says quietly. And someday, they will remember you. The fog presses against the platform like a living thing, curling around the lamps and pooling in corners where shadow eats light. You walk carefully, lantern in hand, boots wet against the slick wood, feeling the pulse of the rails beneath you. There is a rhythm here, faint but unmistakable, the hum of the tracks, the subtle vibration that travels into your chest like a heartbeat. Ahead, near the edge of the platform, a figure waits. A man, tall, thin, shivering in the mist. His clothing is ordinary enough, dark coat, pressed trousers, but something about him makes you pause. He moves almost too fluidly, gliding along the platform as though aware of the gaps and the puddles, stepping perfectly with the rhythm of the rails. The inspector's voice breaks the silence. He wasn't issued a ticket, he says quietly. No record of a passenger, yet here he is. You approach cautiously. The man does not look at you. His gaze is fixed down the line, toward the mist where the rails vanish into shadows. You notice the faint gleam at his neck, a small silver collar, polished and unbroken. It catches the lantern light, reflecting an eerie shimmer, just as the entity has left on other objects. Compartments, windows, beams. You try to speak, but your words catch in your throat. The pulse beneath your boots quickens. You realize it is synchronized with the tremor you've been following for days, the same subtle vibration under platforms, under floors, under sealed compartments. The man moves in perfect rhythm with it, and your chest tightens. Do you see it? The inspector whispers. He isn't riding the train. It rides with him. The man finally turns his head slightly. You see his eyes dark, unfocused, as though he is not entirely present. The silver collar gleams faintly, and you notice a thin streak of soot along the edge, identical to the marks you've followed across compartments, platforms, and rails. His fingers twitch, brushing the air, leaving traces in the mist that seem to shimmer for a heartbeat before vanishing. A soft scraping echoes from the direction of the siding. You glance toward the rails, nothing visible, yet the vibration intensifies, and the man's movements quicken, guided by something beneath the steel, something aware of every step he takes. The lantern light flickers, casting distorted shadows along the fog, stretching the man's silhouette into unnatural angles. The inspector steps closer, voice low. It chose him, or perhaps he chose it. The man lifts a hand, pointing toward the fogged horizon where the rails bend and vanish. The metallic tang in the air intensifies. You feel it settle in your lungs, clinging like smoke. The tremor underfoot becomes insistent, like a heartbeat that cannot be ignored. Suddenly, the man steps forward. His foot hovers above the edge of the platform. The fog swirls around him. The lantern flickers violently, and then he disappears. Not running, not jumping, simply gone, leaving the silver collar behind, resting on the wood with a faint warmth and a trace of soot. The inspector exhales slowly, voice tight. It leaves traces, it takes its lessons, and it watches who notices. The rails hum beneath you. The fog swirls, carrying a pulse that matches your racing heartbeat. Somewhere in the darkness, something has learned another step, and the next passenger may not be so lucky. The platform trembles beneath your boots, a low, steady pulse that seems alive, moving beneath the planks and into your chest. The fog curls in thick, silent waves, wrapping around the lamps and softening the edges of the station into a world that feels both intimate and infinite. Rain drips from the roof, hissing softly as it lands on the metal rails, but the sound barely reaches you over the thrum beneath your feet. You glance at the inspector beside you. His face is pale in the lantern light, lips tight, eyes scanning the shadows where the fog thickens. "It's learning," he whispers. Every time, the pattern repeats. Every tremor, every mark, every disappearance, it grows smarter. Ahead, the last carriage waits, empty, silent, yet somehow charged, as though anticipating the next act in a long, terrifying performance. You step closer, lantern raised, and the floorboards beneath you tremble again, soft at first, then more insistent. The grooves along the sleepers catch, the light, parallel scratches like the marks of long, deliberate fingers dragging along the metal. A faint scraping begins beneath the carriage, slow, measured, deliberate. The same rhythm you've heard in every compartment, beneath every platform, on every sleeper. You crouch, leaning closer to hear it, feeling the vibration pulse through the lantern handle, up your arm, into your chest. The inspector mutters under his breath. It doesn't just move, it studies. You glance along the rails, empty, yet alive with presence. The fog ahead begins to swirl, revealing a vague form, tall, thin, elongated beyond human proportions. Its limbs bend unnaturally, brushing the rails, the floorboards, the undersides of the carriages. The silver collar from the earlier sighting gleams faintly in the dim light, though the figure wears no visible clothing. It is a shadow, with weight, intent, and patience. The tremor beneath the platform grows stronger. You stagger slightly, pressing the lantern closer to the scratches on the sleeper. They form a map, repeated patterns, loops, lines, etched into the rails as though the entity marking them expects someone to follow. You realize with a cold certainty that the creature, the intelligence you have been tracing, has accounted for every movement you and the inspector have made. A sudden shift of weight behind you. The lantern tilts, casting jagged shadows along the walls of the carriage. You spin, but the fog consumes everything. A faint metallic hiss, subtle, deliberate, echoes from beneath the rails. Then, silence. You step forward. The last carriage seems to shiver under the pressure of the unseen presence. The inspector grabs your shoulder. "Step carefully," he warns. It's aware. It's counting. The scrape returns, faster now, across the sleeper, along the rail, echoing beneath the floorboards. You lift the lantern high, trying to illuminate the form, but it is already gone, melted into fog. Only the scratches remain, the grooves, the traces of soot, the subtle vibrations that resonate with your pulse. You realize fully now, the entity does not need to be seen to be present. It leaves behind its path, its knowledge, its warning. Each collapse, each disappearance, each tremor is a lesson for whoever walks these rails next. The fog thickens, wrapping the station in a cold embrace. Somewhere, deep beneath the sleepers, the rhythm continues, deliberate, inevitable, waiting for the next step, the next passenger, the next mistake. The carriage smells of damp wood and cold iron, a faint tang of something older lingering beneath the varnish. You step inside, lantern in hand, and the floorboards groan beneath your weight. The fog has crept in through the broken windows, curling along the seats and pooling in the corners. The rails outside hum faintly, a vibration that resonates through the carriage and up your boots. You kneel to inspect the floorboards. Deep scratches line the wood, parallel and deliberate. Not the random marks of decay or careless work. These are precise, measured, carved with intent. Your fingers trace the grooves, feeling the subtle resonance that hums through the timber, the same pulse you've felt beneath platforms, compartments, and cuttings for days. The inspector crouches beside you, eyes scanning the marks in the lantern light. "It's recording," he whispers. "Every step, every weight, every passage." A faint scrape reaches your ears. You freeze. It comes from beneath the carriage, the unmistakable rhythm of long, deliberate movement along wood and metal. The vibration beneath your boots intensifies, synchronized with the noise. The pattern is familiar now. Slow, deliberate, 3 parallel lines, repeated endlessly. You realize with a cold certainty that these scratches are not merely marks, they are a map, a ledger, a memory. You examine the edges of the boards. Small flecks of soot cling to the cracks, fine and black, identical to the residue found on windowsills, in compartments, and along the rails. Each mark, each particle, seems to hum faintly, as if alive. You glance up at the inspector. His face is pale in the lantern glow. "It doesn't just follow the tracks," he says. "It leaves instructions, warnings, observations, and it remembers." You step back, lantern raised, casting the scratches into sharp relief. Shadows bend along the grooves, twisting unnaturally, stretching across the seat edges, as if something hidden is shaping. You notice faint indentations beside the main scratches, small, deliberate depressions in the wood that indicate pressure points, footsteps too light for a human to leave. It moves beneath the carriage with knowledge, intelligence, and intent. The hum of the rails grows stronger. The fog presses closer, curling around your coat, seeping into your hair, chilling the back of your neck. Outside, the rails gleam wetly in the lantern light. Something is moving along them, something aware of your presence, learning your reactions, anticipating your movements. The scratches in the wood are not merely traces of the past. They are a guide to the next encounter, the next victim, the next observation. The inspector exhales, slowly. Every carriage, every sleeper, every beam, it leaves its memory, and if you follow it, it knows you are watching. A metallic scrape echoes again from beneath the floorboards. You step back instinctively, heart hammering. The scratches seem to pulse, faintly in response, vibrating through the carriage as if alive. The fog curls higher, swallowing the platform outside. You understand, fully and irrevocably, that the entity has mapped not only the rails, but everyone who dares to follow them. It is patient, it is deliberate, and it waits for the next footstep. The lantern trembles in your hand, casting elongated shadows across the wet platform. Fog curls around the lampposts, thick and alive, pressing against the edges of the station like a living thing. Every breath you draw is cold and metallic, mingling with the faint tang of iron from the rails below. The hum beneath your boots grows stronger, deliberate, rhythmic, as though the tracks themselves are breathing and observing your every move. You step closer to the carriage at the far end of the siding. The inspector follows silently, lantern held high, eyes scanning the fog for the faintest hint of movement. The floorboards creak beneath you, though nothing visible stirs. The lantern flickers, and for a heartbeat, you swear the shadows bend toward the carriage, stretching along the rails like long fingers reaching for the wood. A faint tapping begins beneath the boards, slow at first, hesitant, then growing with purpose. The vibration travels through your feet, up your legs, into your chest. You kneel to inspect the floorboards. Parallel scratches run the length of the carriage, deep and precise. The pattern is unmistakable. 3 marks, repeated endlessly, etched by deliberate force. Every groove, every line, every particle of soot seems to pulse with awareness, humming in synchrony with the tremor beneath the rails. The inspector crouches beside you, voice low and tight. "It's leaving a record," he whispers. "A ledger of movement, of steps taken, of people who follow it. Everything it touches, remembers." You lift the lantern to inspect the seats. The upholstery is damp with condensation. Small streaks of soot mar the edges, curling along the fabric in delicate, deliberate lines. The subtle odor of iron lingers, mixing with wet wood and fog. You trace the streaks with a gloved finger, feeling the vibration transmit through the wood, like a heartbeat pressed against your palm. A distant metallic scrape echoes from beneath the rails. The sound is deliberate, insistent, impossible to locate. You rise, turning slowly, eyes scanning the fog beyond the platform. Nothing visible moves, yet the vibration beneath your feet quickens. It is aware of your presence, measuring, observing, recording. The scratches, the grooves, the faint traces of soot, they form a path, a message written for anyone daring to follow. The lantern flickers again. You step back instinctively, feeling the cold press in from all sides. The fog thickens, curling along the platform, obscuring the edges of the rails. You realize with sudden clarity that this is no ordinary presence. It moves through the fog, along the tracks, through the carriages, leaving memory behind. The entity is patient, deliberate, and its lessons are written in iron, wood, and soot. The inspector's voice cuts through the damp silence. Every carriage, every track, every tremor, it has learned. It waits for the next footstep, the next person who thinks they can follow the line. A soft scrape reaches your ears again. Close now. Deliberate. The lantern flickers violently one last time, casting long, trembling shadows across the floorboards. You know, without doubt, that the fog, the rails, and the scratches themselves are alive with its memory, and that it is watching, always watching. The fog thickens along the platform, curling through the arches like smoke that refuses to dissipate. You step carefully, lantern raised, boots slipping slightly on the wet planks, the pulse of the rails vibrating beneath your feet. The inspector follows, his gaze sweeping the mist, noting every shadow, every distorted reflection in the puddles along the edge. The air is thick with the metallic tang of iron and the faint, lingering odor of soot, and you feel it clinging to your skin, sharp and insistent. She waits at the far end of the platform, a woman, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes are wide, scanning the fog, tracing invisible lines that only she can see. The inspector approaches cautiously, lantern light revealing the pale, damp strands of hair clinging to her face. She does not speak at first, merely watches the rails, as though anticipating something that has not yet arrived. Finally, her voice breaks the silence, low and tremulous. "I should not have been alone," she whispers. "I got on at milepost 7. The carriage was empty, and yet I was not alone." She swallows hard, eyes flicking toward the darkened tracks. It was beneath the carriage, moving with the rails, following each step. I heard it scraping along the floorboards, a rhythm I could not escape. You nod, stepping closer, lantern light trembling across the rails. The inspector crouches beside her, listening, understanding without words. The vibration beneath the platform intensifies, faint at first, then insistent, echoing the scraping she describes. It is deliberate, measured the same rhythm, the same pulse you have traced for days. The marks along the sleepers, the scratches on the beams, the streaks of soot in compartments and along windows all connect now, forming a pattern, a language. Her hands tremble as she lifts them. I thought it would take me. I could feel it beneath the carriage, brushing along the wood, testing, learning my steps, my weight. It paused only to study me, and then it vanished into the fog. She shivers, wrapping her arms around herself. I don't know if I was spared or merely observed. You glance at the inspector. His expression is tight, pale, aware. "It records everything," he whispers. "Every tremor, every mark, every passenger, every misstep, and it waits." Outside, The rails hum again, vibrating in time with your heartbeat. The fog swirls, curling along the platform, wrapping around lanterns, pooling in the corners. You realize fully that whatever moves along the tracks does not just follow. It learns, it adapts. It archives the steps of those who dare to walk this line. The woman stands, legs unsteady. She glances toward the tunnel mouth, shivering in the cold, damp air. "It will return," she says softly. And the next person may not be as lucky. A scrape echoes faintly beneath the platform, deliberate and rhythmic. You press the lantern closer to the rails, tracing the vibration as it courses through the sleepers. The fog seems to swell, waiting, pressing inward, patient. The pulse beneath your feet grows stronger, and you understand fully, irrevocably, that the rails remember everything, every step, every scream, every breath. And they will not forget the next time it comes. The platform lies silent under the weight of fog, lantern light trembling along the wet planks. Rain drips from the canopy above, hissing as it lands, and every step you take sends faint vibrations up through the wood, into your boots. The pulse beneath the rails hums faintly, a rhythm that seems alive, deliberate, a heartbeat that mirrors the fear gathering in your chest. You kneel, examining the edge of the platform. There, faint against the wood, are marks, thin streaks of soot and scratches, pressed into the grain as if long fingers dragged along the surface. You run your gloved fingers over the grooves, feeling the subtle resonance pulse through the timber. The inspector crouches beside you, voice low. Every footprint, every mark, every scrape, it remembers. It leaves its ledger for anyone foolish enough to follow. The mist curls around your legs, thick and cold, carrying the faint metallic scent of iron. Another faint scrape echoes from the far end of the platform, deliberate and slow. You rise slowly, lantern raised high, sweeping the light along the tracks. They stretch into the fog, disappearing into grey, wet nothing. Yet, beneath your boots, the vibration grows, synchronized with the rhythm of the scratches you've been following, a deliberate pulse that courses through the rails and into your chest. You notice something else, a small pile of soot near the edge of the platform. Fine, black particles, shaped as though pressed into place. You lift a few onto your glove, examining them closely. The pattern is familiar, the same as the streaks in compartments, the scratches along the sleepers, the faint traces left on windowsills. Each mark is a record, a memory, a trace of the entity that has haunted this line for days. The inspector steps closer to the edge, hand brushing the wet wood. "It's testing the platform," he mutters. "It's leaving breadcrumbs, seeing who notices. Every person who steps here becomes part of its perfecting memory." He glances toward the tunnel mouth where the fog swirls thickly. And it's patient, always patient. You follow his gaze. Faint movement shifts in the fog, too subtle to define. A shadow stretches, almost human, elongated, bending unnaturally as if the fog itself has formed a shape to test your perception. The hum beneath the rails intensifies, the scratches in the timber vibrating in faint response. You step closer to the marks, heart hammering. The soot shifts slightly under your lantern light, as though alive, responding to the pressure of your glove. Another scrape echoes beneath the platform, deliberate, rhythmic, following the same pulse as the previous marks. You realize fully that the rails, the boards, the fog itself, are all part of a network of observation. It does not need to be seen to act. It records, it adapts, it waits. Every misstep, every glance, every movement along this platform has been noted. The inspector exhales, voice tight. The next person who comes here will add to its memory, and it will remember them too. You step back from the marks, lantern held high, watching as the fog swirls and thickens, hiding the rails, the sleepers, and whatever moves just beyond perception. The pulse beneath your feet continues, deliberate, insistent, unending. The platform is no longer just wood and iron. It is a ledger, a record, a witness, and somewhere within the fog, the entity that inscribes it waits for its next chapter. The siding is silent now, the rails gleaming wet in the lantern light, disappearing into fog that presses along the edges of the platform like smoke. You approach the last carriage, cautious, every step measured. The floorboards beneath your boots vibrate faintly, a subtle pulse you recognize now, resonating with the hum of the rails and the scratches along the sleepers. The air smells metallic, damp, and faintly sweet, the same tang that has clung to every object the entity has touched. The carriage doors are closed. You lift the lantern and inspect the brass handles, polished, but with faint smears of soot, like fingerprints pressed into place. The inspector kneels beside the door, tracing the edges of the wood. "It shouldn't be here," he murmurs. "It's empty." But it shouldn't have returned at all. You press your hand against the panel. The vibration beneath the rails intensifies, deliberate, insistent. The scratches in the wood are faint but visible, 3 parallel lines, repeated, leading toward the underside of the carriage. The entity has traveled along this path before. You feel it beneath your boots, a rhythm in the rails, guiding your gaze toward the fog beyond. You lift the lantern higher and peer through the window. The interior is undisturbed, seats in perfect alignment, fabric dry, no signs of struggle, not a single item displaced. Yet the subtle warmth of presence remains, a memory pressed into the wood and metal. The inspector exhales, voice low. It traveled inside and left without leaving a trace anyone else could see. Not a body, not luggage, not a shadow. A faint scraping echoes beneath the carriage. You spin, lantern shaking, but see nothing. The vibration beneath your feet grows stronger, matching the rhythm of the scratches on the sleepers. It moves deliberately, aware of your observation. You trace your eyes along the rails into the fog. They vanish, swallowed, yet you feel the presence, the entity, moving beneath, within, alongside, a ghost woven from steel and shadow. The inspector points toward the windowsill. Faint streaks of soot line the glass, curling along the edge. You lift the lantern closer. Small grooves press into the wood beneath the frame. Tiny, deliberate depressions. Someone or something has tested the surface, left traces for you to find, or perhaps warnings. The rails hum again beneath the carriage, faintly at first, then stronger, a deliberate pulse that travels into your chest. You step back, taking in the carriage and its surroundings. The fog curls along the siding, curling around your legs, the lantern light stretching long and trembling shadows across the platform. The entity has left, but its memory remains, etched into the wood, the rails, the floorboards. Every pulse, every scrape, every mark is recorded. The carriage has returned empty, yet it carries the memory of whatever passed through it. The inspector exhales. "It's patient," he says, quietly. "It waits for the next train, the next passenger, the next misstep." You glance toward the rails disappearing into the fog, the subtle pulse beneath your boots still echoing. Somewhere ahead, the entity watches, marking its path, recording every step, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The inspector sits at his desk long after the station has emptied, lantern light flickering across scattered papers and the open map of the rails. The fog presses against the windows, curling along the edges, and the subtle hum of the tracks beneath the city vibrates faintly through the floorboards. He doesn't move, doesn't eat, doesn't even breathe fully, simply stares at the records, the scratches, the letters, the patterns etched into every sleeper and compartment that has passed through his jurisdiction. You enter quietly, boots barely making a sound on the wet floorboards. The inspector glances at you without speaking. His eyes are rimmed with exhaustion, red and strained. "I can't sleep," he says finally. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear it tapping beneath the rails, moving along the floors, leaving its marks. I see the scratches, the soot, the patterns, and I feel its attention on me." You kneel beside him, examining the lantern light illuminating the map. Routes drawn over and over, some existing, some impossible. Parallel lines mark every tremor, every disappearance, every step the entity has traced along the line. The inspector runs his hand through his hair, gripping the map tightly. It knows we are tracing it. Every decision we make, every step we take, every inspection, it is catalogued, remembered, anticipated. It's patient, always patient, and it waits. A soft scrape reaches your ears. Faint, rhythmic. You glance toward the platform window. Fog shifts along the siding, moving with a deliberate motion. The rails beneath the station hum in response to some unseen weight, some deliberate intelligence. You trace the vibration through the floorboards, feeling the pulse that has followed you from the first compartment, through every cuttings, every milepost, every abandoned carriage. The inspector picks up a letter left on the desk, one of many. The ink shifts slightly in the lantern light, still seeming alive. He reads aloud, voice low and strained. It watches beneath the boards. It counts steps. It marks the rails. It learns. And now it knows you are awake. He places the letter down carefully, as if afraid to disturb the energy lingering in it. You notice faint scratches along the desk itself, long, deliberate, shallow enough to be missed by an inattentive eye. They echo the same marks found on platforms, sleepers, and compartments, a record of presence, proof that it is aware of everyone who observes. The inspector sighs, voice barely above a whisper. I cannot sleep because I know it is patient. It waits for the next train, the next carriage, the next person to step where they shouldn't. Every observation we make is catalogued. Everything is remembered. The fog thickens against the windows, curling around the lantern's glow. The pulse beneath your feet grows, synchronized with a low scraping, deliberate, intelligent. Somewhere beyond the station, along the hidden tracks, the entity moves, unseen but fully aware. The inspector leans back, eyes closing briefly, then opens them again. Sleep is no longer an option. It records everything, and tonight, it has recorded us. You rise, lantern raised higher, watching the fog swirl along the empty platform. The vibration continues beneath your boots, steady and insistent. Outside, a faint whistle echoes, hollow and deliberate, as though calling across miles of rails. The inspector remains motionless, listening, aware that the night is far from over, and in the darkness beyond the fog, the rails remember everything, every step, every tremor, every heartbeat. The rain falls heavier tonight, drumming against the station canopy, soaking the platform in a steady rhythm that echoes through the empty arches. Fog curls low along the rails, thick and oppressive, curling around your boots and climbing along the edges of lantern light. You hold your lantern higher, sweeping the beam across the wet planks. Somewhere along the siding, a figure waits. A woman, tall, slender, draped in a dark coat, clutching a black umbrella that seems to absorb the light. Her face is obscured, shadowed by the low brim of a hat, but her presence is undeniable. She stands perfectly still, watching the rails as though aware of every vibration, every tremor beneath the sleepers, every scratch etched into the wood. The inspector steps beside you quietly, voice low. She's not ordinary, he murmurs. Someone waiting for a train at this hour, in the fog, in the storm. It's deliberate. She may know more than anyone else here. You approach cautiously. The pulse, beneath your boots, quickens, synchronized with the faint hum of the rails. Every scratch you've seen over the past days in compartments, on platforms, along sleepers, seems to resonate through the wood, vibrating faintly under your fingers. The fog moves around her as though it recognizes her presence, curling and twisting like smoke around a candle flame. The woman lifts her umbrella slightly. Her head tilts as if listening to something beyond your perception. A soft scrape echoes from the rails beneath the siding. Not a train, not the sound of water. Something deliberate, moving along the metal with a rhythm that matches the scratches you've been tracing. You realize she hears it, responds to it, and perhaps even communicates with it. You stop, lantern trembling. The inspector crouches, scanning the fog. Do you see that? He whispers. In the distance, along the track, a faint glow appears, a reflection of the rails, or perhaps something else moving just beyond the fog's edge. The vibration beneath your feet grows stronger, pulsing in deliberate rhythm with the entity you've followed for days. The woman steps forward slowly, umbrella held high, boots silent on the wet planks. Each movement is deliberate, controlled, measured. You notice faint streaks along her coat, the same soot that clings to every mark left by the entity. Compartments, sleepers, windowsills. Every step she takes seems to echo, deliberately, across the rails, leaving a memory behind. A soft, metallic tap resonates from beneath the platform. The woman pauses, tilting her head slightly. You feel it in your chest, the pulse, deliberate, intelligent. She lifts her hand, gesturing faintly toward the tracks. The fog swirls around her, heavier, darker. The rails beneath your feet seem to hum, carrying the presence along the line. The inspector exhales. It watches through her, he mutters. Or maybe it rides with her. The woman stands still again, black umbrella, taut in the storm, a sentinel in the fog. The hum beneath the rails pulses steadily, and you know, without a doubt, that she is either a messenger or a witness to what moves unseen. The entity's memory stretches through the rails, into the fog, into the wet wood beneath your boots, and somewhere along the siding, it is recording the steps of every observer. You step back, lantern held high. The fog thickens further, curling around her like a cloak, and she dissolves into the grey, leaving only the pulse beneath the rails and the memory of presence. The station is empty now, lanterns swinging faintly in the fog that presses against the platform like a living thing. You stand at the edge, boots sinking slightly into puddles of rainwater, lantern held high, tracing the faint outlines of the sleepers beneath the rails. The vibration beneath your feet is steady, deliberate, a pulse that travels up through the timber, into your legs, and into your chest. It is familiar, insistent, alive. The inspector leans beside you, voice low, almost a whisper. Everything we've seen, every tremor, every scrape, every mark, every disappearance, the rails remember it all. And now they remember us. He gestures toward the tracks stretching into the fog. Every step, every breath, every presence along these lines is recorded. The scratches, the grooves, the soot, it is all a ledger. You kneel, running a gloved hand along the edge of the sleeper. Deep scratches run in parallel, precise, deliberate. The faint hum of the rails pulses in, response, echoing the rhythm of the marks. You realize with a chill that this is not random. It is communication, observation, instruction. Each mark, each line, each trace of soot carries a memory, a warning, a lesson. The fog thickens, curling into the station, pressing against lanterns and walls, wrapping around your boots. A scrape echoes beneath the platform, faint at first, then deliberate. The vibration beneath your feet intensifies, synchronized with the rhythm of the scratches on the sleepers. You glance at the inspector. His face is pale, drawn tight with exhaustion. It records everything, he murmurs, and it waits. You lift the lantern, light slicing through the grey haze. The rails gleam wetly, reflecting faint halos of orange from the lamps. Along the edge, parallel grooves continue endlessly, disappearing into the fog. The metallic tang of iron and soot clings to your gloves, to your skin, and you feel it settle in your chest, a constant reminder that entity has been here, has followed every movement, and will continue to do so. A low whistle carries through the fog, hollow, deliberate, piercing the stillness. You recognize it immediately, the cry that has echoed in your mind since the first tremor. The rails hum again, synchronized with it. Somewhere beyond the fog, a shadow moves along the line, elongated, fluid, bending unnaturally. Its fingers brush the steel, leaving faint traces of soot and scratches, marking its passage, inscribing memory into the very tracks themselves. The inspector exhales, voice tight. It doesn't just follow the trains. It inhabits the rails. Every passenger, every step, every misstep is remembered. Nothing escapes its ledger. You stand, lantern held high, scanning the platform, the rails, the fog. Somewhere in the distance, faint shapes move along the tracks, imperceptible but deliberate. The pulse beneath your feet continues, insistent, alive. You realize fully, with a cold certainty, that the rails are no longer passive. They are conscious, aware, patient. They remember everything, and they will remember the next person who dares to walk their path. The fog curls higher. The pulse beneath the rails grows stronger. Somewhere in the shadows, the entity waits, patient, deliberate, inevitable, and the rails, steel and timber, will record every moment.